increasing the production value.
I know it's a dangerous thing to do because you're setting a new precedent.
Yeah, I know, and then people will
Yeah,
expect that we will
2.0.
keep this, we will keep this standard, and actually it's not going to happen.
So this isn't walk the talk. This is between two ferns.
Our version.
Our version, no.
But yeah, having a guru like ours,
Yeah.
It's like that,
He
you
would-
never know what to expect.
Yeah.
He's gonna
He'd be happy no
destroy
matter what.
everything. Yeah.
But I also think the only instruction he's ever given me,
Enjoy.
thank you, is
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Govind. Govind is the first. He's the first guest. He's the first person I ever did.
I don't think I saw that one. I've got to go back.
He's the first. He's the first ever.
Nice.
With him, everything started with him.
I'll go back.
I was inspired by his channel.
Yeah.
And he was sharing his process every day. And I was like, man, this takes a lot of guts.
Yeah.
To put the camera on you and be honest and go through that in front of everybody. And then I said, okay, let's try it out, see what happens. And it evolved into conversations, which is my favorite.
Nice.
So yeah.
Nice.
Welcome.
My Adita does.
Swamini Prathiba, I'm so happy to have you here. We've been communicating since a while now.
Yeah.
I was quite touched by your satsangs when you started giving online satsangs, and then I read your book, Inside the Wall. I was like blown away, and I was so happy that there was someone from the industry that has been walking the path for so long, and I can have a conversation with someone who's like, oh, we share the same profession, now we can think about how this influenced our careers and how we could improve and give back.
Because that Romanian saxang was one of the very first when I was invited to talk to you guys. And I remember you, and when you said you were an actor, I said,
it's really nice.
You're trying to suppress the whole film thing, but you're like, oh,
no.
an actor.
I said I quit acting, but now it seems like it's coming back in our lives. It's interesting how we...
Gurji's going to make movies.
Yeah, and I'm excited about this. We're not going to share too much, but I think it's going to be one of the steps, the next steps of Bhakti Marga, and hopefully we can bring our share into all of this.
I think so.
Yeah, but let's go back to the beginning, because I would really love for people to know you better. I highly recommend for people to read the book, Inside the Wall. I'm going to put a link in the description with, I think it's on Amazon probably.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to share that. Highly recommend that. But we can touch upon some highlights in the book.
Right.
And how did it all start for you, the spiritual journey, walking the path?
So something my son has told me not to say to people is there's always been a voice in my head, and he's like, Mom, I wouldn't tell people about that, they'll lock you up. But there's always been an intuition that would actually speak, right? And so it was such a subtle, soft thing that it was never a frightening thing. And I thought everybody had that everybody had some kind of, little suggestions would pop in and do things. So it wasn't active all the time, but whenever I'd made a decision to step out of chaos or step out of the norm, I could always feel this, yay, right? So it never encouraged me to, I was born in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I played by the rules, and I got a degree.
Nice girl.
Nice girl, look for a good husband. I married someone who was a really creative, interesting guy, and then he got headhunted by the oil patch. And we lived in Calgary, which is the oil capital of Canada. And he just morphed into this suit, right? He just took out the earrings, got rid of everything that made him sort of a unique individual. And I remember one day going to visit him at the oil tower, and the security, I was working for a recording studio at the time, so I was always wearing, big heavy winter coats and jeans and cowboy boots. And the security said, "We've been told not to let you upstairs if you're dressed like that."
Oh, wow.
So he didn't tell me. He had security tell me that I couldn't look the way I looked when
Don't
he fell
be
in love
yourself.
with me. Yeah,
Because I'm someone else.
right. And so actually, despite this wonderful, normal upbringing, right, nothing really major went wrong. I was just a shy kid. But I remember when I was in that first marriage, and we lived in a penthouse. We were getting ready to go to the Bahamas. Like, we had money. And he would phone to make sure I was at home alone. So he was on the road, and I found out later that the entertainment budget the oil company gave him was to buy drugs and hookers for clients. And I'm this naive, right?
Yeah.
Golly, I wonder where he is now, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I just knew nothing. And but he would make sure that I was in place, that no matter how wild he was, I was at home behaving.
It's good for his reputation.
Yes. And so I remember one night I was sitting in the living room. It was all marble and glass, and I was watching TV. And the voice, which had been quiet for a long time, said, "Well, I guess you've made it. You can just sit here and watch TV till the day you die." And it freaked me out. I just jumped up and I turned the TV off. And that was the night I started writing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I just thought, I can't just let
You
my
had to
life.
take it out.
Yeah. And so the first thing I wrote, he read it and he said, "Your writing will ruin our marriage." And I thought, no, you hating me writing will ruin our marriage.
Good point.
And I loved movies, so I thought, well, I'll try writing screenplays. And they would just play in my head, so I would just write it down as fast as I could, these movies. So I always felt like they came from somewhere, because I'd just get the idea, and then the thing would start playing. And sometimes I'd be writing, and it would get funny, and I'd start laughing, and then I'd go, wait, give me a minute, and I'd laugh, and then I'd go, okay, and then it would start playing again. So that was how I wrote.
Oh, so it came...
It just would play in my head.
Man, that's interesting.
And
Wow.
so the one that I knew was something special was a children's movie. And I sent it to Disney in LA, and they said, "You better get your ass down here. Like, someone's going to buy this movie." And I told my dear one, and he said, "You can't go." And I sort of said some unladylike things, and I left.
Very good.
Yeah, I just thought, enough. And I really had a strong sense. It started and ended in 4 years, that marriage. And now, knowing what I've gone through in the teachings and what I've learned about karma, I realized I was cleaning up a karmic relationship from another life. Yeah. Because it started just love at first sight. We're soulmates, we're twin flames. The thing that makes Gurji laugh the hardest.
Yes, twin flames.
Yep. And it blew up, within 3 years, and in 4 years it was over. So, and we were able to reconnect years later and be friends. So.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, so I realized when these karmic things happen, that's why Guruji says, don't judge someone. They're just triggering karma, right?
Yeah.
So they're not really at fault or the bad guy. They're triggering something.
Yeah, it's like an episode that hasn't ended, and you just have to play the conclusion.
Right.
It's
and
like
then,
the end of the story, basically.
and when the director goes cut, the actors can be friends.
Yeah, of course.
Because they're done acting out.
Exactly.
Yeah, the analogies to film
It's beautiful.
of this
That's
life.
why I love it. Yeah.
And I remember I'm gonna bounce around a lot just so people know.
Very good.
But when Guruji first flew to Vancouver to find me, he had me sit right next to him, and I was trying not to have a panic attack. But I'd never sat.
Here,
Did I
have this? No. What? Sorry. Okay. It's going to be better if you put the
this is
kawacham
Babaji.
inside. Yeah, Babaji.
Babaji.
Very, very good. I think it was touching.
Rattling
that also,
around
So it's
and-
good.
Okay.
Now it's perfect.
But there's a red light.
Yeah, it's recording.
Oh. Hello.
We professionals.
We're very professional here. One of the first things Gurji and I talked about was immortals. And because a question that I'd always had was, I'd read about Babaji's sister Mataji. You know, she's in Autobiography of a Yogi, she's mentioned. And so I said, does Mataji ever come out? Like out in the public? And he said, no, she stays in Varanasi. And then he said, but you know, there's immortals older than them. And I had read about this in one of these huts I was abandoned in. Every hut that they sent me to, there was a book. And I'd read the book. And as soon as he said there's older ones, my brain just went, this is why you read that book. And I said, you mean the Saptarishis? And he went, yes! And I said, it's my understanding they've written everything that's to happen and we just have to play our part. Yes! Like he just lost it. And I thought, this makes so much sense to me as a filmmaker, right? The Saptarishis write the script, the Satguru is the director, and we're actors. So all we have to do is listen to the director. Like, can you imagine getting on a film set and nobody's following the script, everyone's ad-libbing?
And they say, actually, I don't want this part. I want that other part. I want to play Hamlet today. Yeah, but the cast is done. No, we've shot half of the movie. I don't care. I want to be Hamlet now.
Like, that's life, right?
Exactly.
Nobody doing what they're, nobody doing their Dharma.
Yeah.
And as soon as he said that, I was like, I'm in. Like, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it.
Nice.
Because being a filmmaker, I know how frustrating it is if people won't play their part.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, we go back to Disney wanting my script. And so I literally had a little two-seater 280ZX, you know, a little sporty car. So I put my typewriter and my guitar and my electric walk, and I drove to LA. And I sang all the way. Like, the feeling of freedom was unbelievable. And the voice was just singing along with me, right? I could tell that it was so happy that I got the message, finished the lesson, and got out. You know, instead of going to therapy and trying to make this marriage last for 50 years.
Yeah.
And when the voice said, I guess you've made it, you can sit here till the day you die, the image that was dropped in on me was of an old lady in a beautiful evening gown with jewels and a martini sitting on that couch watching that TV. And it just terrified me. It's like, you can just sit here and wait to die, or you can live, right? You can make the decision to live. Wow. And it's interesting, when I've done book signings for that memoir, whenever I'm with a group of very wealthy women, the first question they have is, I can't believe you walked away from the money. And I look at them and I literally see haunted souls who have sold their soul to the devil to keep the money.
Yeah.
So they've probably looked the other way while their husbands had affairs and done whatever, just so they would keep the house, keep the money, right?
Comfort zone at the ultimate
Yeah.
level.
And I remember one of them said, okay, wait a minute, you look like us. They said, you know, I read your book. I can't believe this is what you look like. And I said, did you expect me to be naked, covered in locusts, riding in on an ass? And they went, yeah, pretty much. Ta-da! And you can see that they can't believe that I would have walked away from the lives they were in. And it's like Gurji, that you heard the story about him in LA. He was invited to some Hollywood party.
No.
Very
maybe,
famous.
Yeah. Tell that story. I remember now.
Yeah, I can't remember who was with him, but it was a while back. And so they thought they would impress him by taking him to this is where the important people, the celebrities. And after they left, Gurji just said, what sad people. They need help. Right? Like, he could just see everybody was putting on a fake front. No, I'm successful, I'm happy. I live in a mansion on Sunset Boulevard that has no furniture in it, so I can have the address, right? Like, the acting that is going on all the time in LA is massive. Wow. And so when I got down there, I now know that Gurji was behind what happened in Los Angeles, because everybody who wanted to make my movies lost their job or their company went out of business.
That's a good.
So I was like the Typhoid Mary of screenwriting. And it got to the point where people would say, I love your work, I want to help. And I'm like, no, I like you.
Don't touch it.
Don't touch it.
It's gonna ruin
That's right.
you.
You'll be destroyed.
It's gonna liberate you forever.
And literally when I, 30 years later, I'm in the temple with Gurji, and he goes, you made a movie. I thought, oh, here we go. He's acting. I went, yep. And he went, what happened? And I said, nothing. Nobody cared. And then he got that look and he said, submit your work again. It'll sell this time. And I knew that he had stopped all the sales because I had to become a Swami first, right?
Yep.
Like if I had been successful, so this was the 80s. If I'd been successful, I'd probably be dead by now.
Yeah.
Just knowing
Makes
now
sense.
that we know
Makes
what we
sense.
know
Yeah.
about the industry.
And what's coming?
Yeah.
What's revealed now in the industry?
Just horrific, yeah, what people have gone through. And I had meetings with some of these people who are now in prison. And literally, it was like I was just weaving through. I just kept getting moved through. And a lot of the meetings, I felt so filthy, like just so disgusting. Luckily, I never had to strip and do any sexual favors. But just, you could feel it was hovering. And so I would go down to Venice Beach and find a homeless person and buy them coffee. And I loved it, so I started writing because I thought I need a project while I'm having these horrible meetings. So I started writing about the homeless and the situations that put them there because they were unbelievable situations. This one man, he was a carpenter, and he had his full kit with him, so he was still working daily as a carpenter, but living on Venice Beach. And his wife left him and joined the Mormon church. And they used all their legal power to keep him from seeing his kids. And he used every penny he had trying to get custody of his children, and the church outlasted him. And so he was homeless on Venice Beach, still a working carpenter, right? And another time I was standing on the boardwalk and the garbage next to me moved. And this head popped up and this hand and guy had a cigarette and he said, you got a light? And I said, sorry, I don't smoke. And then he sort of shook off the garbage bag, and it was the only limb he had left. His legs were gone and his left arm was gone. And so I just blurted it out. I said, what happened to you? And he was a heavy equipment operator, and something went wrong and there was a crash, and whatever he was driving tore off his limbs, and the company didn't have insurance. And in America, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
Right? Canada, it's socialized medicine, which the US is always making fun of.
Yeah.
But that man would have received medical care and prosthetics. And in the States, it's like, oh, too bad, let's throw you out with the garbage.
It doesn't, your number.
Yeah.
Your number on our sheet, and we don't like this number.
Right.
Writing
And
it out.
so the more people I was talking to, the more I needed to know what was happening, because this was 1988 and no one would talk about the homeless. There was like, oh, it'll never happen to me. It'll go away.
We pretend it doesn't
We'll
exist.
pretend it's not there. And the Pope came to visit LA, and they put all the homeless people on buses and drove them out to the desert and left them there. And it took them days to walk back. But so when the Pope went through, he didn't see any homeless people. So anyway, the more I learned, I thought, this is real. Like I'm playing in this imaginary world, right, of filmmaking. I thought, this is real. And every night I'd go home to my roommate, and I'd stumbled on her immediately. I went into the women in film office, and she was running it, and she was looking for a roommate, and we, just instant friends. And so I'd go home and I'd tell her the latest homie story, and she was so frustrated with me because I was supposed to be having meetings with the business, and and she went, oh, why don't you just go live with them and get it over with? And I went, oh, you're right. And she went, I'm kidding. But like a bomb went off.
Wow.
And Gurji keeps telling us to learn to trust our intuition.
Yeah.
Oh, am I? I'm being
Move
dangerous with
that.
the microphone.
Move the microphone. Yeah.
There.
Good.
Okay.
It's nice.
It's nice. It's balanced. And he says, learn what your intuition is. And for me, that wild exhilaration is a yes.
Yeah.
And feeling dead is a no. And so when people would say, you need to get a corporate job, and wear a suit and do this, I thought, shoot me, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't, it became harder and harder to try and pretend I could be that person or in that world. And so when she said, go live with the homeless, I was like, yes! She's like, you'll be dead by morning. I was like, I don't think so, right? And so I spent that night out by the pool, the little kidney-shaped pool, to see how cold it gets, because it is a desert, LA. And it actually does get cold at night. So I figured out what I'd wear, and I've always traveled alone, so I knew that I had to wear baggy clothes, stick my hair up under a hat, so you don't draw attention to yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
A woman.
A woman.
Alone.
Yeah. You've got to look like some bag lady, right?
Yeah.
And she drove me down to Santa Monica Pier, and you better phone me every morning or I'm calling the cops. And so the one thing I had to do was every morning I'd go to the little payphone, I'd have a quarter.
Back in the
And
days.
back in the day, and I'd phone her. But every day I was happier and happier, and she got madder and madder. And I found that so strange. Like, why is my happiness upsetting you? And it was because her paradigm was be afraid of the homeless, like this was what the news had told her.
Yeah.
Be afraid of them because they'll rape you and kill you.
Yeah.
And every day was brighter and happier, and she was furious. And
You were challenging her beliefs, basically.
Yeah. And it was one of the most important times of my life. And the camp that took me in was run by a black Rastafarian artist. And he was a Vietnam vet. And most of the black men I interviewed were Vietnam vets who'd been experimented on by the government. Because you sign away your rights when you join the American Army, and they cut you open, they put things in you, they take things out, they give you drugs, and they never tell you what they've done.
And we call this conspiracy theory.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, no, it's just people imagining stuff.
Right. And
You met them,
yeah. And I remember one day, there's such an etiquette and kindness on the street, right? And this one day, an older man came up and sat next to me on the bench, and everyone just moved away because it turned out he hadn't spoken for 2 years. And he just sat down and he said, I hear you're a writer. And I said, yes. And he said, I need to tell somebody what happened to me. And he explained about going to sleep in the barracks and waking up in the morning, and he'd been completely ripped opened up surgically. And they wouldn't tell him if they put something in or took something out. And he went crazy, and he was living on the street, right? And I was just writing and crying, right, and writing. And I thought, something's going horribly wrong in the world, right? The facade is getting pulled off. And I think that was one of my hints that I had to find the truth, right? I had to find out what was really going on in the world.
Yeah.
And so without knowing it was a spiritual search yet, I could tell and Gurji says, Maya will beat you with a stick to make you cry for God. And that's what I was seeing, right? I thought, I have to find out the truth fast, or else this isn't going to be worth it, right? I might as well just kill myself.
Yeah, because it's heart-wrenching.
Yeah, it really is.
It's devastating, especially if you are a compassionate human being. And I just hear the story. I know I read it in the book,
Right.
but hearing it now, I just feel it all over my body again.
Yeah.
Could just imagine what's happening.
And I was naive. I thought, well, if everyone just took home one homeless person, we could solve the problem. And so, of course, I did. I took home the head of the camp, John, and we did fall in love. And he showed me how to survive on the street. So the funnest part of that, which you remember from the book, was he buried himself in the sand at night to avoid the police. And so they called him Dead Man because everyone else was afraid to bury themselves, right? But he's like, everyone had to find a place to sleep for the night, dumpsters or back alleys. And he said, do you want to sleep on the beach? I was like, yeah, I'm in, right? So he dug this trench for me, and I got in and then put a blanket over me and then covered me with sand. So when the police went by with their spotlights and their cruisers, they didn't see a bump. Like if they saw a bump, they'd arrest you, and you can't sleep on the beach. So we were underground. And you'd sleep sideways with an air passage out the side. And helicopters are going over constantly, searching.
Really?
So it was like Blade Runner.
It
was like a war zone. And John said from the air, we'd just look like abandoned blankets, right? Because there's no human shape. It's just... And so, I used to...
Good to know, good to know.
Yeah, if you ever have to sleep on... And so I'm, of course, being the idiot Canadian, and I said, this is like camping. And he's like, we're not camping. We're homeless.
Surviving.
That's right. And I said, put a tent over us and we're camping, right? Like, it's just
Nice.
vocabulary. But he showed me so much about life, and because he was an artist and a musician and Black, so he'd always been on the receiving end of horrific things down in the States. And he'd get locked up for no reason. And we'd be walking down the street and police would stop him and ask him for his ID. And so I'd just look at them and say, why aren't you asking me for my ID? And they'd just pretend I wasn't there, right? And look at him. And I asked him about that, and he said, your face is your passport. He said, you've got the look that will get you into any country in the world. You'll never be stopped. And it was humbling to realize that, right? That everything else is a test. So anyway, fast forward, I did it, everything lined up. We left the beach, we got a place to stay up in Topanga Canyon where all the hillbillies and pot growers are. So it was just wild up there. And he was offered a job in Encinitas, which is Paramahamsa Yogananda's main town.
Ashram,
Yeah, the big ashram, and that's where he wrote Autobiography of a Yogi. And I didn't know any of that. And all of a sudden, he was hired to build a juice bar, which is what he used to do, 2 doors down from the temple. So
what were the chances?
I know. So he'd be working, and I'd just wander around. And there used to be work crews on Saturdays doing seva, cleaning the temple and everything. So I just started showing up there because I found out I could meditate in there anytime I wanted, and I was meditating, and eventually we got pregnant, and I kept getting the strongest message in that voice that I wasn't supposed to go to a hospital. We were supposed to do it in our little beach hut. And so when I told John, he just about had a heart attack, and he's like, I'm not a doctor, I'm an artist. And I said, I know I can't go into a hospital. And American hospitals are notorious for switching babies, losing babies, giving them the wrong shot. They're horrible. So one night he dreamt it, and all his art came to him in dreams. And so he said, okay, we can do this, but you have to know what you're doing. Like, you have to be in charge and just tell me, which was perfect because I've heard so many women have their power taken away from them in a hospital. They have a plan for how they want to birth, and then everyone just ignores them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And pushes them through and puts them on their back. So the last thing you should have a 10-pound baby going down your spine, right, on your back. And so either stand up and let gravity pull the baby out, or get on your hands and knees, so the weights. So anyway, I read all the books I could, and we took care of this baby in our little hut. And it was so funny. At one point, John had created all kinds of gadgets. So at one point, I was on a birthing chair, and I'm just huffing and puffing. And we had this rescue cat that kept jumping through the window with presents. So I'd be, and the cat would jump here and then let go a butterfly or grasshopper. And I remember, like I'm right-handed, but I remember the cat letting go this moth, and I grabbed it and I went, take it outside. And my husband and the cat ran outside because I had turned into this scary, and your wife, I don't know if she went through that shift where you become really focused.
I think,
You just, I'm in charge now. And,
yeah.
and I'd heard
The
that
Divine Mother manifests.
Callie's
instantly.
birthing a baby. Yeah, so I scared everybody out of the hut, and I kept moving around the room. Like every time the baby shifted, I just was free to wander. But then, all of a sudden, I found out I died. Like
Wow.
John was watching me, and he said I stopped breathing, and I stopped. There was no pulse, and it was like his worst nightmare had just happened. But what I experienced was I was pulled out of my body, and I was in this dark place, but there was a gold wall that went as far as I could see. And now I know it was the Akashic Records. And it was like hieroglyphics, and so I couldn't read it. And now I know that if I had died for good, I would have been able to read
Your life story.
my life story. But because I wasn't supposed to stay,
You just saw the library.
but that voice was there, so there was no form to it. But it was so comforting because I knew that voice, right? And now I know it's Guruji, right? But we'll get to that. And instead of going, I'm in the presence of God, I went, I don't think I can do this. I was just this wimpy mess, right? And he said, you're not being harmed, you're just driving this vehicle. And I realized that the soul steps into the body the way we step into a car, right? You get in, you drive it around, you get out.
Yep.
And so we had this conversation, and who knows, it seemed like a long conversation, but in real time, luckily, it was seconds. So John didn't have to phone the ambulance or something. And so it kept calming me down. And I said, why isn't this baby being born? And it said, because you refuse to stop being a child. I'm like, I'm not. And I realized John and I were like children, right? We had no responsibility. We did what we wanted, and no one could tell us what to do. So I said, okay, I'll step up. I'll be the parent. And what I realized was John didn't, oops.
It's good. It's good there.
John didn't make that commitment, right? John didn't have that shift that I did. And at the end of the conversation, when I could tell it was time to get back in my body, I said, please let this baby be born. And this voice just roared at me, and it said, don't be a beggar, demand it as a child of God. And so I just roared in this space, I demand this baby be born. And boom, I was back in the body. And everything just started moving really fast. And I had read that we will often repeat our birth trauma. And I was born with the cord around my neck.
Oh, okay.
And I was told in an Akashic reading in India as a sannyas that I had been with John in a past life, and I had hung myself. I died by hanging. And I was told, you will have evidence of that hanging on this body. And I said, I was born with the cord so tight they couldn't get me out. He said, that was the hanging. And I loved that each lifetime is just a chapter in our book.
Yep.
Right? So that chapter ended with me hanging. I came in with the cord, they got it off, and then this new life started. And however I exit this one will set up the next chapter. Yes, if I have to come back.
Because now we have Guruji, and
right, and he tells us
he can close the
book. Close the book, or if we decide to come play with him again, we're allowed to come back and play. So it's so comforting, right? Because it's whatever happens, it's just another movie, right?
Yeah.
And I love that.
That's amazing.
And so when our son popped out, John saw the cord, and he flicked it forward, and the next push, he said he actually sat back going, well, this is going to take a while. And the next push, Issa shot out, and he was airborne like a football. And John caught him.
Wow.
Umbilical cord unraveling.
Nice.
And John had said he was going to do the old, what they do in the movies, hold the kid up by his feet and smack him to make him cry. And I said, you don't have to. The cord keeps pumping oxygen. So there's no panic, to cut the cord. We wait till he's breathing. And he said, I better hear a sound out of that kid or I'm going to freak out. And so he caught Isa, and Isa looked at him and went, ah. Like, it's okay, Dad. Look, lungs are working. Don't hit me.
Nice.
And we just burst out laughing because we knew he knew.
Yeah.
And when he came out, I don't know if your baby looked like this, but he looked like liver. He just, they're just purple and like
They're ugly.
smushed
They're ugly.
up. But I felt Isa come over my shoulder. I felt his soul had been here, and he hit the body, and the body went, bah, and just opened up like a flower, right? Turned pink. Everything became a baby part, right? So it was astonishing. And friends of ours, asked John, they're like, oh, weren't you grossed out? And he said, I've held so many dying homies in my hands. He said, to hold new life. He said, that's it, I'm going to hang up my spurs and close the gate behind me. He said, I've seen it all.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that sort of came true. Like within the year, he had a psychotic break. And he tried to kill us. One night, he used to carve djembe drums with axes. And he came home and grabbed an axe off the wall and came after us. And
the trauma caught up with him, and he...
Yeah, who knows what, the karma, and we found out later he had a brain tumor, and he started self-medicating with crack. And the cops, the police who loved him, said that they call it the Jekyll and Hyde drug because beautiful people turn into demons.
Yeah.
And so we had to run. And the good thing about that was, I guess we were homeless. We were never sleeping on the street, which was a blessing. We always ended up with somewhere to stay, but one night I was in this abandoned motel room. It was the only place I could find, and rain was pouring in under the door, and I had my baby wrapped up in one of those emergency silver blankets in a box, and I was just crying. Like, I had a degree, I had a CV, right? Like, and I just, how did this happen, right?
Wasn't I supposed to be the old lady in the
Yeah,
glass cage?
and the diamonds. Yeah, this is not. And so I cried all night, and I think about 2 a.m, I just prayed. And I said, God, if you're still with me, I give up. I said, I don't know how this happened, and I don't know how to make it stop. And I said, but if you fix this, I'll do whatever you want the rest of my life.
That was the moment of surrender.
And who knew it would lead to this, right?
Wow.
But it was complete surrender because my brain left. Like, you could tell my mind figured I was a loser, right? Like, I'm gone. This person's useless.
Yeah, it's that, I think that's karpanyam, when you're helpless. You acknowledge in front of God, I cannot do anything.
Right.
I'm helpless.
Yeah. And the mind, all it can do is access old records. So the mind is just a computer program that goes through and goes, oh, we've done this before. You just have to do this. But in this case, my mind had no idea, right? Like, clueless. And so when I said that prayer, the rain kept coming in and nothing changed, right? There was no bolt of lightning or anything. But in the morning, the sun came out, and there was just silence. Like, there was real stillness. And I just said, what should I do? And the voice immediately said, call Jennifer, who was a friend. So I went up to the payphone, the good old days, right? And phoned her. And she was there in seconds. And she said, this whole town has been waiting for you to ask for help. And she said, but you're so proud. And you're always saying how you can handle anything. So we didn't want to insult you. And I thought, how stupid. I didn't fool anybody. Putting on the brave face and, no, we're fine, we'll work through it. And everyone was just dying, watching me with my toddler. And so she took us back to her place, and her husband had a little guy. We were in the same play group, right? So my son had someone to play with, and they wouldn't let me pay for anything, and they ate healthy, organic farmers and everything, and it ended. So as soon as I surrendered, it ended. And so what happened for me was I realized I had to relearn how to live, because the way I was living had led me there. And so I still don't make a move without asking that voice.
Yeah.
What are we going to do today? Okay, buddy. Like, this is, I realized this is my best friend, and it's like, what are we doing today? And there's always a quick answer. So people ask me, how do you know what's that inspiration and what's your mind?
Yeah.
And even Gurji has said the very first answer is God. And then all the babble afterwards is us.
All the questions, everything is the mind.
Well, wouldn't it be better if I went over here first? Or
Yep.
Yeah. So it's that very first, like, all I heard that morning was call Jennifer. And she'd been waiting for me to call. She was just, her heart was breaking, knowing what was happening to us. And so I just, bit by bit, relearned how to live. And one day I was walking past the Self-Realization Fellowship bookstore, holding my toddler's hand. He was like 3. And he stopped in front of the thing and pointed at Sri Yukteswar, Yogananda's guru. And he said, I know that guy. I was like, you know him? And I had been circling them thinking it was a cult.
Yeah.
He said, yeah. I said, you want that picture? Yep. So he was the reason I went into the bookstore the first time. And so the first book I got was Holy Science by Sri Yukteswar. Because being a scientist, my degree was science. I thought, okay, well, let's see what he has to say about that. And it was so logical, right? The Holy Science, comparing religions. And so then I bought Autobiography of a Yogi, and of course that blew my mind. And they had a sign in the bookstore window that said, by Krishna, even a little practice will save you from great fear in this lifetime, from the Bhagavad Gita. And I thought, I have to learn to stop being so afraid all the time. And
so fear was a constant somehow.
Yeah.
Before your son was born, or after did this fear manifest?
I think I came into this life with it because of that last life. I think the fact that I hung myself.
So it was an underlying.
They say you're in a sort of a purgatory, reliving the reason you killed yourself. So they say it is hell that you're held in, and so I think, being born again, my soul was really aware of what it had just come out of, right? That purgatory from the suicide. Because they say suicide is one of the biggest sins that you can actually do for yourself. And so I think that's where that fear came from. Because I had, like I say, my dad was a mountain climber. My mom, worked for...
Tough people who were like...
Yeah, really functional. Nobody needed psychiatrists. Nobody was on drugs or alcohol. It was just we were always in the mountains. They taught us to ski, and my dad taught me to do guy things because he didn't want me to be one of those useless women who can't even change a tire, right? He was just like brutal. But he kind of prepared me for gurus, right? When people are like, gurus are really scary, I'm like, Dad was army, right?
Live with him, with gurus.
Yeah, I know. Because I was terrified of him till I was an adult. And it was because he was so afraid for us, right? And then once we became adults, we had great conversations, and I loved him. But I could see where his concern was, because he knew what happened to girls. Girls get raped. I had curfews. None of my friends had curfews. But he knew what could go wrong, right? So I was always grateful to him. And at first, when I married a black man, all hell broke loose. And then when we had Isa, our son, my family was like, okay, we've got to go down and meet them. And, so they had met John, and they adored him. And my dad had been army, plus he was a wood carver, plus he was a drummer, and so was John.
Yeah, wow.
And so to see this old white army guy from the mountains with this street kid, right? Black Rastafarian, he looked like Bob Marley. And they just clicked. They were just instantly friends. So I know they were heartbroken too when everything went south so fast. But as soon as I started doing the Kriya Yoga from Yogananda, and they would mail you your lessons every 2 weeks, and it was so affordable that even on what I was making in the greenhouses, I could pay for it. And it became very obvious that forgiveness is a massive step in anyone's life or spiritual life. And I remembered playing the victim and thinking, well, if anyone has a reason to not forgive, it's someone whose husband tried to kill them. Like, that bastard.
I have all the reasons.
And everyone was supporting me. Yeah, you don't have to. Yeah, so that there was a whole cheerleading squad letting me stay a victim. And then, thank God, the Kriya Yoga lessons, I started to realize I have to forgive him.
Otherwise, you don't let go.
Yeah.
You carry that with you.
Yep. And the one phrase I heard was, "You were him in a past life, and by forgiving him, you forgive yourself." And so that was a real punch to the gut, because you love to think you're an angel.
Of course.
You've never done anything.
I've been only the positive characters in the movies.
That's right.
Always the hero.
I've
the
never
villain.
been a bad.
Never a villain.
I've never played a devil, a demon.
Of course.
But we all have.
Yeah.
And what I realize is we don't know the load of karma we're dragging behind us like weights. And the laws of karma are so massive that, one description I read was that every mosquito you've killed, you have to wait for it to evolve to a human so it can kill you. And I thought, I've killed millions, right? Like, just mosquitoes alone, let alone ants.
And whatever we killed and what we ate and
Right.
Oh my God.
When we were meat eaters and
Oh my God.
And I realized that's the urgency of a guru, is they can move you through your karma at a pace that would take us thousands of years, thousands of lifetimes, right? And so a lot of the steps I've gone through, I felt weights being lifted. Like it was a very palpable,
You feel it physically in your body.
Yeah.
You feel it,
You feel something shifted. And forgiveness was a huge one. And it made it very easy for me, my family who thought I was nuts, you just keep forgiving them.
Yep.
And when basically I forgave John, and I ran into him one day, and he was his old self, like and so I told him what I'd been doing, and he said, I know when you started that process, he said, I felt like the world didn't hate me anymore. And I just felt awful, because then he started having grand mal seizures, and we found out this brain tumor was going on. So he had no memory of the attack, and he didn't know why he lost his family.
Wow.
And I was heartbroken for him, because I thought, thank God I was able to forgive him and not have him die, like just despondent, like what on earth happened. And as it was, his son got to see him as a healthy person, or not healthy, but as a peaceful, spiritual, like he had been. And then he just vanished. And I waited for a while, and then finally I thought, we've got to get back to Canada. Like, I have no support down here. At least I've got family back there, and the school system's better, because he's already in kindergarten and grade 1. And the one thing we did do for grade 1, I homeschooled him, because I was invited. My yoga group had an artist colony, and they knew I needed a place to live. And so we moved in there, and I could homeschool him, and they wanted me to work downstairs at the software company, and it was too good to be true, which is the sign of a cult. And when that epiphany hit me that I'd stumbled into a cult, I was like, what? Like, what have I ever done to you? Because it was just
all the places.
one damn thing after another. Like, my life was this gong show. And I thought, well, there goes the Mom of the Year award. Right? Like, my I'm dragging my kid to teepees in the desert and like rave parties. It's just, but then, now I'm, full on Hindu, and when people want to say I've joined a cult, I can go,
I've been in one. I know
and
how
I
it looks.
realized that's why
Yeah.
I had to experience it, because it's a very clear distinction that a cult can't function beyond the physical presence of the leader, and they don't let you leave, right? And the way Guruji, people come and go, and he's like, whatever you have to do, and a cult will not allow
they don't
you.
let you do
No, and they cut you off from your family. Like it's a real.
And there's a
specific-
selection of a particular type of people,
Yeah.
and Bhakti Marga has so much diversity
Right.
that you cannot. I mean, you cannot hold these people together.
No.
The only thing that holds them, binds them, if you want, it's the love for him, the love for the Guru, the love for God, and the search. Otherwise, everybody would like.
Right.
Because we're super different, strong characters, independent people.
Yeah. And go back to their places in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Like nobody is trapped.
Yeah, they don't have to be physically in one place.
Right. And even the residents here go home and visit their families.
Of course.
Whereas a cult, they were really specific about how I just started to get, and I think because I was a single mom in another country, they figured they had me, right? And thank God, I just kept doing my Kriya practice. And so even though it got crazier and crazier, there was a real bubble around me, and we ended up surviving
The protection of Kriya.
that
The
experience.
protection of the masters.
Yeah.
Yeah, Babaji
Exactly.
was there.
Yeah.
Guruji was there.
Yeah.
They were like.
Because I
always
remember
with you.
one day I was, my son had fallen asleep and it was about midnight and I was doing my Kriya and they started hammering on the door demanding I come out for a meeting. And the voice just kept saying, hold your pose, do your practice. And so I just kept doing my Kriya. And everyone out there is losing their mind and banging on the walls and being stupid. And I just kept doing my practice. So
Wow.
it was a great demonstration for me
The power
that
of
you're
Kriya.
always safe. Yeah. Like you're going to go through.
You're in the presence of the masters. Whenever you do Kriya, the masters are there with you.
Yep.
So nothing can happen.
And what I've realized too is we have events in our lives that are in the script. The script tells us these events are going to happen, but it's up to us whether it's a tragedy or an event,
Yep.
right? And your spiritual sadhana is what just makes you go through these events and hopefully learn the lesson,
Yes.
right? And so for me, some things that when I was wondering why I had to become homeless, when, fast forward to going into prisons to work with kids, and the first time I went into a cell block to teach them meditation, which I told the Christian counselor that it was a self-soothing technique. So,
Very good.
So she let me self-soothe me.
Very
Because
nice.
I was writing this is years later, I was writing life histories for foster kids. And a lot of their problems are that they're with adults who don't know how to self-soothe. They grew up with a crack addict or an alcoholic, so they never learned
They don't know
how to calm down.
regulate their emotions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it just gets passed down. And so I said I was going to teach them a self-soothing technique. And the first cell block I walked into, these kids were 16, but they're big kids, pierced and tattooed. And this one huge Native American kid, he goes, "Are you trying to convert us?" Because there's a horrible history of residential schools in Canada where these kids were tortured. And So he looked at me like I was some kind of Christian missionary. And I said, "You don't have to believe anything. It's a technique." And I said, "My husband tried to kill me and my baby, and I wound up on the street." I said, "This will save you from great fear." And they all sat down, and the guard was like he said he'd never seen anything like it. And I said, "They have really well-tuned bullshit meters, right? And as soon as they hear truth, you've got them."
Yep.
And they were adorable. Like as soon as I started working with those kids, it reminded me of the kids on Venice Beach,
Yeah.
right? And my heart was just, these are my kids.
Yeah.
Like this is my mission, is these kids. Because if you can help them before they become addicts, right? Because adults who are addicts, that's a whole other ballgame. And there's lots of organizations that work with people dealing with that. But if you can help a kid, they will never,
Prevent that, yeah.
they don't have to become an addict, right? You fix that samskara,
Yeah.
right, when they're young. And so as I look back on all of these chaotic times in my life, I can see the brilliance of why I had to go through it. Right? It all makes sense.
Because it gives you all the experience you need in
Yes.
order for you to have skills that you will use
To help.
in the future. You
Right.
never know.
Yeah. And so I don't know if you want me to use my previous guru's name or not,
Of course.
but
Tell everybody, because it's interesting, because who knows, people will recognize their own story and their own sympathies.
Cool.
Yeah.
so I got back to Canada and just became one of the working, unwashed. And I remember thinking, that's it? That's the end of the adventure?
This is going to be my life.
Yeah,
until I die.
work to pay the bills, to work to pay the bills. And, I knew enough not to date because I'd seen how much women would mess up their kids by dating.
Yeah.
And I remember we were sharing a place at one point with this other single mom and her 2 kids. And so basically she just used me as her excuse to be out every night, right? Because there's an adult at home with her kids. And one night her little girl came up to me and said, "Can you teach me how to be more fun so Mom will stay home with us?" I said, "She's not going out because you're not fun. She's a slut."
She's like looking for something else
Yeah.
that you cannot give her.
And I just thought, how horrible is that? These little kids think that they're too boring or too ugly for Mom to stay home. And
That's
so I made a
heartbreaking,
promise.
yeah.
I thought, that's it. Just because John's gone, I'm done dating.
Yeah.
I cannot do that to him.
You became a
And
brahmachari, basically.
So I did. Yeah, I really.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because just before I moved to India to take sannyas, I waited until my son was on his own and traveling, and there was one more relationship that showed up, but I realized it sort of completed it for me because it was the first time I felt like I was in charge of a relationship.
Oh, okay.
I wasn't the one that was the doormat, that was just doing what I was told. I was working in films. I was a driver, right? I was a teamster since I couldn't get my films made. And I found out I was making more money than the writers by driving trucks. They put you up in a 5-star hotel, right? Give you a per diem. And I'd be like, "What's this for?" And they're extras. And I said, "Well, you're feeding me and you put me up at $200 a day per diem. I guess for cigarettes and beer."
Yeah, for some, just don't get bored because we're gonna need you fresh in the morning.
So the universe was, I could feel it laughing. Like, don't worry about the film, about the script thing, right? And it was fun playing in films. Like, it was still fun being with crews and touring with them. And the last big movie I got to do before I moved to India was Christopher Nolan's Interstellar.
Interstellar, crazy.
And I got to see the big boys work, right? And it was just so much fun, and I made money hand over fist and paid off my debts.
Wow.
Because to take sannyas in India, you have to sign a contract saying your relationships are complete, your debts are paid, nobody's going to be mad at you.
Yeah, that's really
And nobody's going to be storming the ashram with a lawyer to
they
pull
don't
you
want
out.
Problem,
They don't need problems. So you have to guarantee that your life is taken care of.
You're in order.
Yeah.
Everything's settled.
And I had been, when my son was, I said, what would he have been, 19? And I had learned about Paramahamsa Nityananda's meditation techniques from one of his teachers who came to Canada. And it was wonderful. And so a bunch of us started doing it regularly. And then Nityananda actually came to Vancouver, Canada, which seems to be the guru place. So I met Nityananda there and I met Vishwananda there. And it was just a great one-day program. And then he went back and we were all just sort of, yay, that was wonderful. And then as soon as I put my son on a plane, I got a call from India. And they said, he wants you to write for him. How fast can you get here? I was like, now? I just put my kid on a plane, right? And when my son left, I remember just sitting in shock in our little basement suite because I thought, I don't know who I am, right? It had taken everything to keep him alive, keep a roof over our heads, right? Like we'd gone through so much trauma. And then he was gone. And I was like, well, who am I? Right? And then 4 days later, the call.
Wow.
How fast can you come to India? And Nityananda had huge scandals going on. And later, the CEO for Sun Media quit and held a press conference saying that all of the media reports about him were fake, and that's how they'd been extorting money out of famous people for decades. And they had phoned Nityananda and said, if you don't give us this many million rupees or whatever, we're going to release a sex tape. And Nityananda went, give it your best shot, right? He's Shiva.
Yeah.
And he was like, try it. And so they released the sex tape and all hell broke loose, and people were phoning me going, did you hear, this guru, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I don't know what's going on in India, but I said, I know his techniques are flawless, so I'm going to keep doing the meditation. Yeah. They're like, oh, okay. And my son watched the sex tape that got released to YouTube, and he said, if that's what they consider hot sex, that's really sad. And they later proved it was a morphed video, right? Yeah. And so they wanted someone to write a magazine for them to counteract all this bad press. So the next thing I know, I'm in this ashram outside of Bangalore, and I'd had blinders on about India. I'd never been interested in it, never wanted to go, nothing. And as soon as I got there, it felt like home. I thought, this is really familiar, like something's happening. And, we'd get up at 4:30 and do yoga. We learned puja, there was a satsang, and then they put me in the publication department because I was a writer. And, the meals came out like clockwork, and I couldn't believe it. I was just swimming in it.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a change.
Yeah.
After all this life of struggling, hustling, now suddenly everything is provided, you're taken care of.
Yeah.
All you have to do is meditate and do your
seva.
Write your...
Yeah. And it was interesting because some people, back in Canada, they were like, well, you don't have to do anything that extreme. And I said, I realized in Canada, at my age, I'm supposed to retire and join a golf club and drink myself to death. Because that's literally what the women I grew up with are doing.
Wow.
They chase a ball around a lawn and drink. And I said, I've decided to be of service to humanity. And everyone just shut up. Like, how do you respond to that?
How do you respond? That's the reality of life, and nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, it's like once women have done their duty, they raised the kids and they did something, now just stay over there in the corner and don't bother anybody.
Exactly.
Right, just don't get in the way.
Just gonna wait for you to die, and
Yes, they're waiting to die. And a lot of them are in mansions waiting to die.
Yeah.
And when I heard that the Hindu tradition was, you go through all these life stages, you're a student, you get married, you raise kids, you retire, and then you take sannyas. And I thought, that's it. Like, I'm going to come back and take sannyas. So as I was finishing up my time there, writing the magazine, and Nityananda put on a free 7-week course for everyone who stood by him when he was in jail. And so it's called Living Enlightenment. And so a lot of the techniques that were taught removed the trauma, because I had major PTSD going on. And he just kept putting us through processes that removed it. And I just thought, that's it, I'm coming back. And it was funny because I think it was like the week before I left, out of the blue, he initiated me as a brahmachari.
Wow.
And his Swami started to fight with him, and he blew. I walked into this monk meeting in time to see him just going after them, going, how dare you tell me who I can initiate and what I can do? Like, he says, you have no idea who that soul is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and so he initiated me as a brahmachari, but then because I hadn't met the conditions yet, so I couldn't stay there. I had to go back and clean up my life. And so one of his head swamis, who became my best friend, and his name was Bhakta Swami, who's the Bhakta part of. So the rest of the Shaivites were pretty warrior-like, but he was definitely a Bhakta. And he said, I don't know what to do with you. He said, he's never done this before. And he said, I know you have to go back. And he said, do your best, try and stay vegan, we understand if you're not going to be able to follow all the rules because you're not in an ashram. And he said, and if you come back, we'll be thrilled. And he says, but if you get out and find out you rushed into it or change your mind, he said, it's okay, it happens. And I realized how important that was after the cult experience.
That you
for
could
them to
have
say,
that you can go out.
Go out, and
there's
if you
an
change
exit,
your
yeah.
mind, we get it. I just thought
Wow.
I needed to hear that.
Yeah.
And so it took me 4 years to clean everything up, and I realized my son wasn't ready for me to leave, right? So just 4 years of being around
Yeah,
and
the
helping
guru
him.
knows.
And so then I just gave everything away, gave the kid the car, and went to India, right? And I remember walking into the office, and Bhakta Swami was there, and he goes, well, how long are you here for this time? And I said, I'm here to take sannyas. And he just went, like, because I think they were wondering, 4 years, is she coming back, is she not? And the amazing thing was, like I was just full on. I was working in publications. My book had come out. And so he was just treating me like gold, and everybody else hated me. So this is the other churning thing in these ashrams, right? Like they hit the jealousy buttons, you name it. And so right off the bat, they were mad at me. And but one night, I remember I was up. It's a big property, and so the deities are kind of scattered around in the forest and everything. And I was up helping the pujari with Dakshinamurti. And I leaned, and it was like the deity reached out and grabbed my Rudraksha necklace and ripped it. And so these Rudraksha just scattered everywhere. And then the pujari went, Garuda. And I went, what? And he pointed, and there was this huge eagle, brown eagle with a white head, which they say is Garuda.
Narayan was circling you.
And
Vishnu is around.
And I'm like, who's Garuda, right? Because I didn't even know Shiva. I didn't know anything. And he goes, something big is going to happen. Like, that's a sign. Something big's going to happen. And so he helped me pick up all the Rudrakshas. And then we went down, a surprise meeting was called.
I'm going to put it here.
Oh, because I keep...
It's good.
Okay. This surprise meeting was called, and for the one and only time in his history, Nityananda said, all the sannyas candidates were going to the Nasik Kumbh Mela, because he always initiated at the ashram. And so same thing, I had no plan to ever go to a Kumbh Mela.
Which year was this?
So this would have been 2015.
2015.
And Guruji was invited to our tent.
Wow.
So I was there, like to do seva. We had a huge crowd staying with us, and then to be initiated. And one day, Guruji was invited, and apparently, and historically, Shaivites and Vaishnavas have fought and killed each other at Kumbh Melas, which, like, how ridiculous is that? You're all Hindus, anyway. So they keep them in different parts of the river. It's like, so the Vaishnavas, they
don't meet. Yeah.
The Shaivites are down here. But as a show of unity, Nityananda invited Guruji and his entourage to come to our camp for lunch. And I just remember I was sitting in the tent, and Guruji walked in, and now with these tall, majestic beings who I now know are Revati and Aniruddha, like all the tall swamis. And I went, who is that? And everyone's like, some guy from Europe. I'm like, Europe, why haven't I heard about him? Like, Europe's closer to Canada and nobody would tell me anything. And the feeling I got off him was...
That was the first time you saw him?
That was the first time I saw him. And he just swept in and went up on stage, and they had lunch, and I was just blown away. And then, but I just carried on, and the night that we were all supposed to be initiated, we were showering and changing to go down to the river, and a priest was going to do some rituals. And at the last minute, I got called out, and they said, no, we decided you're too immature, it's not going to happen. And I'm looking at these goofballs that are supposed to get initiated with me, and some of them had just made the decision that afternoon.
Wow.
And I'm like, I'm too immature. But now I know what happened was they all dropped their vows. all 10 that were initiated that night
With you.
dropped their vows. Well, no, I was pulled out of the group.
Wow.
And so I wasn't in the photo. There's no proof I was ever with Nityananda. 9 years I was with him.
Wow.
There isn't one photo of me with him. So
They
they pulled.
erased you from the history.
Well, it wasn't supposed. I was never supposed to end up there, right? And so when they pulled me out, it set off some samskara, right? Because I was crying so hard I was almost convulsing, and so I think it's from a past life. I think maybe I was rejected by a guru in a past life or something, because it really hit me hard. And one of the Swamis, young Swaminis, was so sweet, and she came over and she said, "I don't know what's going on here, like you were supposed to." But she said, "Don't let this unravel you. Like, get control. Just pull yourself together." And then Bhakta Swami ran by and he goes, "Come on, we got to go." And I said, "I can't come." And he just looked at me and he just ran out, and he told me later that he would have started crying if he had stayed. Like, he was so shocked that I'd been pulled out. So I got my act together, and the group all came back from the river, and it was pretty quick. Like, they had sort of the speedy version of the initiation, because there's so many of them. And so, they all went up on stage, and I clapped and cheered for them with everybody else. I thought, what the heck, easy come, easy go. And Nityananda was watching me, and when he saw that I was okay, he grabbed the microphone and he said, "Take her to the river, I'll make her a sannyas." And so these two interpreters grabbed me, and it was like a movie. We ran out into the night, got into a rickshaw, and went down into the old town of Nasik, and we were running down these cobblestone streets in the rain, trying to find a priest. And then someone said, "There's that guy here," and we went upstairs, and he made us tea and talked to us, and he said, "Okay, it's too late, the temple's closed. Meet me first thing in the morning." It's the Triambakeshwar temple. So I always remember, Swamini Triambakeshwar, I always remember her name. And so the next morning, these two interpreters took me down there, and I had a 2-hour massive initiation from this old priest. And so they were translating for me each step. And he'd do certain ceremonies, and then I'd go dunk 3 times, and none of the others got to do it. Like, they did one quick one, and boom, they were out of there. And then I had to go down a back alley and feed a crow and a cow. Like, he did the old school big. And I had to make a rice ball for each departed ancestor, and then we did offerings to the ancestors. And so I made like 4 or 5, and he's yelling at my translators, "You haven't translated it properly." All the ancestors are like, "She's Canadian. Her parents are only children." Like, this is it. Because I guess normally the whole platform's full of rice balls. And I'm sitting there with my little, and so I started doing offerings, and all of a sudden one of the rice balls just went bang, like this. And I was like, "Oh no, I made a bad rice ball." And the priest was like, "No," he said, "that ancestor is pleased and accepts your offering." And it was my dad. So my mountain climbing dad, who died 20 years before, was sitting in that temple with me in India when I was being initiated.
Accepting your offering, making peace.
And I could just hear him, "Way to go, little girl." Like, way to go.
That's my girl.
Yeah.
That's my girl.
I taught her to be outside the box. And she's all the way outside. And so they took me back to the camp, and it was being dismantled. Like, the Kumbh Mela was over. And so literally, I just ran up on stage, was handed a sari and given the name Mayatita Nanda, and told to stay and pack up the kitchen. So everyone else got in air-conditioned coaches and left, and I was sleeping on the ground with street dogs, which ended up being my MO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so nobody saw it happen. There's no photos of it happening. And, you fast forward to me being initiated by Guruji, and, I'll get to that part of the story, but at one point he goes, "How does this compare to your other initiation?" And I said, "This is unbelievable." I said, "The other one, nobody even knew it happened. And I had to stay and work and sleep with street dogs." And just the look in his face was like, "Yeah, we're better." You're with the good group
So
now.
sweet.
Yeah, it was just really sweet. But for him to know what the other initiation had been like and just go, how does this compare? By the way, I don't know.
Like, I think you're one of the only swamis who got 2 initiations.
Right.
Like, in
But
2
it was,
different traditions, and it's quite beautiful to
and
witness
it's
this.
profound because the first, the initiation is a sannyas. I'm with the Mahanirvana Kata, which was Buddha's. So he got the term nirvana from his akata. So he lived and died as a sannyas with that akata. Buddhism was created afterwards by his followers. He never stopped being Hindu, right? And so we got to go to the Mahanirvana Akata is the oldest one in India. And so we got to go there one time when we were at Varanasi. It's right on the Ganges. We got to go there and serve them dinner. And the energy in the place, when you figure it's tens of thousands of years old, and the sannyasis are in tombs radiating still on the property. Yeah, it's just, so I'm so grateful that I got to see that part of India, that rich, ancient, and we were trained within an inch of our lives. Like, they're so strict and they shriek at you if you do something wrong. So, the puja, the doing abhishekam to the deities, dressing deities, like,
Discipline.
it was amazing discipline and training. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I think Guruji knew that me being alone in Canada, that I had to be trained well, and it wasn't something that would happen here, right? He doesn't demand as much from everyone.
And you don't get to spend enough time here to get this training.
Exactly.
When you need to be straight back there and start working with the training that you already had.
Right. And so it was, the time I spent there, I'll never regret it. And a lot of people at first were like, how can you switch gurus, or, that's an insult, and it's not. Like, what became so obvious is all of these gurus are from source, right? And a true guru is interested in your best interests. So you always hear about a guru will switch someone to someone else if they figure, no, I've done all I can for you, now you should switch to this one, right? They're selfless.
Yep.
And so that's what was, Nityananda and Vishwananda, he said they always incarnate at the same time. Vishnu and Shiva always show up at the same time. And they're like a counterpoint, because Shiva's wild, right? And the destroyer. So he has to destroy everything you think you are. And Vishnu's the sustainer. So once you've been wrecked, he can put you back together. So you carry on. So when I was in India, it was all about, insults. How as soon as I became a sannyas, I was no longer the favorite. You're so stupid and ignorant. Isn't that the stupidest thing? Like, no matter what I did, I was useless. And so after a while, it just rolls off you. Like, okay, I'm an idiot. Right? But it was interesting, because after 6 months, I remember we were called to another midnight meeting. And so the day starts at 4:30 with an hour and a half of yoga. And you'd be cleaning up in the office, trying to get to bed, and then meeting in the courtyard. And I remember the night that finally shifted everything. I was walking across this dark compound to the courtyard, and I went, Babaji, you gave me a guru who's a jerk. Thanks a lot. Because I'd learned about Babaji. And then when I heard Paramahamsa Nityananda had been named by him, I thought, well, that's my signal to go to him. And then, of course, with Guruji, it's his guru. And so it's like, oh, I'm all in. But I needed Babaji's validation to go to the next step. And so I was blaming him for me being in this situation. And so I got into the courtyard, and it was done like the really old grand temples. And I had learned to sit behind the pillar and stay out of sight, because whenever he caught my eye, he'd start on me. You idiot! You're useless! Right? And so I was just sort of huddled behind a pillar, trying to stay awake. And all of a sudden he goes, Ma Mayatita, he said, I'm so happy with her. He said, I couldn't make her run. And I sort of peeked around the pillar, and And he said, she's here for the right reason. There's no plan B. And I thought, that's what was going on.
He was pushing to see if you crack.
Are you going to be worth it? Because they put so much of themselves in us to help fix us and overcome this karma. If they're going to take on all that karma, they want to know you're going to be worth the trouble.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember just it helped me with Guruji, with everything, like to realize that they have to push you to see if they can push you away. Right? And then if they can't, they're like, okay, I can work with you.
Yeah.
Right?
We can move on. We unlock
We
the
can
next
get-
level.
yeah.
We unlock the next level.
Yeah, we can get
Otherwise
out of the playground, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm sort of doing my best with him. And then out of nowhere, we got to go to the Ujjain Kumbh Mela because there was a weird alignment of stars. So that instead of the Kumbh Mela being in 3 years at the next location, it was going to be in 8 months.
Wow.
And it's the Simha, ironically, Kumbh Mela. And so we charged off again, and by now Nityananda was really famous. So he was the lead in the parade, the opening parade, and we were 3 kilometers long. We had elephants, we had naked Babas on white horses painted, like it was like something out of a movie.
Wow.
It was, and we couldn't even see the start of our group. And we had trucks playing music, you know, and everyone dancing, and we had 5,000 people staying in our camp with us. And there was about 3 dozen of us looking after them. And so if you weren't fixing broken toilets, you were cutting up vegetables at midnight, or you were trying to help someone who was throwing up in the bathroom. Like, it was unending exhaustion. And I remember, and we were quite far away from the river because it was such a big camp. And we were seeing 100,000 people a day. So we had a huge police force looking after the just crowd control.
Yeah.
And I remember one morning, you know, I was up early, did puja in the temple tent that we had set up. And I was furious. I was just so angry. And I remember coming out of the tent and the voice goes, you know, you're not a slave. You can leave. And I was like, I can leave. I don't need this. And I found some everyone kept stealing my patakas, right? Because they were orange sannyas patakas, so everyone kept taking them as souvenirs. And there was a pile that every night they'd use a bulldozer to bulldoze all the claimed shoes.
Unclaimed shoes.
So I found 2 sandals that fit on my feet, and I stormed out the gate. And there was these little wandering sadhus going by, and I'm like, I'm going to go with these guys. And you could see them sort of like, oh, who's this? I said, I'm going to live like them. I'm going to sleep in the ditch. I'm going to beg for food. I don't need this crap. You know,
I have this experience
That's
from
right.
Venice Beach.
That's right.
I know how to
I'm
dig a
out of
hole.
here. And you know, this whole time I'm walking by our fence because our compound was huge. I'm ranting and raving in my head, and these little guys are trying to get away from me, right? And I'm just keeping up with them. And then I got to the end of our fence, and I stopped, and the voice went, you want to go have breakfast? And I went, yeah. I went back. And it reminded me, when I was a kid, I ran away every week. I had a little suitcase packed all the time, and every time my brother...
weekly escape.
Every time my brother would fight with me, I'd grab my suitcase and I'd leave, and my dad's mom, who was a doll, she was a nurse up in the Yukon during the gold rush, and she was just compassionate and tough, right? And so my brother, I realized to upset him.
Yeah.
She's leaving, she's really leaving. And my grandmother would go, bye, have a good life, bye. Come on, wave goodbye to your sister. And I'd storm out, right? And I'd get to the top of the street and I'd just sit there listening to my brother cry, going, yeah, yeah. And then I'd go home. So I had that flee response in me, and so I tried it at the Kumbh Mela, and
It didn't work.
I didn't have the guts to. But we were finally allowed to go to the river one day. They gave the workers a break to go down, and so it was a couple of miles to get down there. And we dunked, and then the women were all, come on, run, run, we've got to get back. And my foot did something really weird. It started to snap every time I stepped on it. I thought, oh no, like something's going on. So I just started walking really consciously. I just slowly if I put it down really gently, it didn't do that. So I was walking like that, and this beautiful young man was walking towards me. And so there's millions of us, right? 70 million people at the Kumbh Mela.
Crazy.
And so there's a mob of us unwashed. But this beautiful young, he looked 18, jeans and a t-shirt, right? Long black hair. And I couldn't stop looking at him. Like he almost looked like AI compared to everyone else, right? There was something not quite real about him. He was perfect. And I'm exhausted. I'm just stumbling along and looking at him. And as soon as he got next to me, there we go. As soon as he got next to me, in my head, I heard this whisper, Babaji. And I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. And it was like, bang! And then every cell started going zzz, like this. And I just, because I'd read that he shows up at the Kumbh Mela. I'm like, oh my God. And I spun around to bow to him, and he was gone. And then my mind kicked in and went, you ass, that wasn't Babaji. You're hallucinating, you're so tired. But my body wouldn't stop vibrating, and I knew something had happened. And I'd heard that when you come in contact with the energy field of an immortal, that it leaves an imprint on you. And so I kind of staggered back to the camp, and I got into the big darshan tent where there was like 5,000 people lined up for darshan. And Nityananda looked across the hall at me, and he gave me this startled look. I was just at the opening, and I realized he saw that, and I got a message last year from Babaji, and he said that when I said my name to you at the Kumbh Mela, it was a sign that you were moving to Vishwananda. And I didn't know any of that, right? So this is where the trust comes in. We are clueless.
We have no idea, man.
And as soon as the Kumbh Mela was over, I got kicked out of the ashram. No explanation, okay, so now you're going to go do this and learn this, and then another guru will take you by the hand really gently, right?
And don't worry, we have everything planned.
We have this all planned.
No
You don't
worries.
have to worry about a thing. You're just these random events. And so you scream at God for a while and go, what the hell? Like, what have I ever done to you? And so literally, once the Kumbh Mela was over, they sent me to this abandoned property that had a hut on it. And a lot of people were leaving property to Nityananda in their wills, but he didn't have the manpower to develop every single piece of land. So he would send sannyasis to live on it, but he usually sent men. And so the first time I was sent away to a hut, there was a couple of other women there, and so they showed me the routine, like how you buy your vegetables every day, because we had no fridge, and it was just a cement block hut. And I just started gardening, because the place had never been looked after, and I just started gardening to get out of the hut, and because the women were fighting all the time, right? Some scares just bing, 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 bing. So I'd go garden, and they'd say, don't go out there, there's cobras living in that hill. I'm like, what else could go wrong, right? Come on.
I'll take my chance.
I'll take my chance.
I'll take my chance with the cobras, honestly.
Right. And these women, these fighting women. And so I actually enjoyed it more than the ashram because of the freedom. We got to make our own meals, right? There was something to do every day. And I befriended some street dogs that, like in the morning, I'd go get flowers and the milk for puja. And these two, the generic street dog in India, right? It's a muscular, short-haired something. But these two were always sleeping together, and I had a feeling the black one was the mother and the beige one was the daughter. And the black one had been in some horrible accident or someone had hurt her because she was so afraid of me. And so every morning I'd go, hey, sweetie, how are you? And she started, thumping her tail a bit. And then it got to the point where they would escort me. Like they'd wait for me outside the gate. And then they'd march around the neighborhood like, this is our human. We've got a human. And the black one, her spine had been broken and healed. And so it looked like her butt was trying to pass her shoulders. Like it wasn't a straight line.
Crooked.
And the tail was broken in 3 places.
Oh my
Like this
God,
dog.
Imagine the image of you walking down the street.
So everyone thought I was crazy, right? Because it was like being escorted by rats as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, like 2 dogs in this
I know.
European white
Right, white.
sanyas. Like, man.
She thinks
the
she's a
image.
Swami, right?
She's deluded.
Because in Hinduism, women aren't normally
Yeah,
in
of
orange.
course, yeah.
So they're just, she's gone. But the great thing about befriending them was, like they sent me around to other places, but one day this weird event happened and some men broke onto the property and vandalized the mandir and the deity. So I don't know what karma has happened to them. But we woke up in the morning and the hut had a really thick door with deadbolts on it, which sort of seemed strange. But now I realize that that property was a target, right? And developers were trying to grab it from Nityananda because it was prime real estate. And so they were constantly trying to get bulldozers into the property to bulldoze everything and start building. So we had this strong, locked door, and we opened the door and we could see this devastation out in the yard. And one man had left his sandals right at the door to show how close he'd been and taken the sandals of one of the girls. And so we phoned the ashram and they were like, file a police report, then everybody back except my Adita. They leave her with the phone. And these women were like, he never leaves a woman alone, let alone a Western woman. And they tried so hard, like they kept responding and going, you can't be serious. It's like, he says, everybody back but her. And so I'm like, okay, here we go, game's changing, right? And so they all took off, and as they were leaving their little rickshaws, my 2 girls, the dogs were sort of there, and I opened the gate and I went, and they were like, because street dogs never get invited in anywhere. Yeah, go on. And they just roared in, and they're so smart. They immediately started eating grass, like they knew that was the healthiest thing for them. And so my routine became, walking the neighborhood in the morning with the dogs, and then I put these old yoga mats behind me, and I'd sit out in front of the mandir and do puja, and they would sit behind me, and they both healed. Like all the stuff, they had mange, they had ticks, they had all kinds of things, and they both healed from being in the presence of the puja every morning. And so then out of nowhere, the money stopped coming, right? I'd sent in on that stupid little phone where you had to hit the button 3 times to get, they approved my budget, and it was only 2,000 rupees a month, $20, right? But you could live on that there, right? That paid for the cell phone, the electricity, and the food, and propane. So anyway, it's been approved. It'll come today without fail. And then nothing, and then the phone died, and then the electricity got cut off, and the food ran out. And I remember the dogs sort of looking at me one day, for the milk, because I'd always give them milk.
What are we doing?
I said, there's nothing left. And, they knew what was being said, right? And so my mind just went into a tailspin, and it went into this. Don't they understand? They're killing me, those accountants. They're sitting there at the ashram being fed. They don't know, And so I played a victim for 3 months.
Wow.
Right? Every day, my morning sadhana was spectacular. Like it kept me on. I'd get up at 4:30, do my yoga, do the puja, address the deity. So I was really balanced until I had nothing to do in the afternoon, and then my mind would go, "Oh, remember the time your cat died?" Like it would just pull out the saddest events. Remember when that guy dumped you? And I would just sit and go into these melancholy states. And then finally one day I stood up to it and I said, "Stop it." I said, "You've done this to me my whole life. Like I'll be having a good day and then you'll remind me of something." I said, "Stop it." And so that was the first time I consciously took control of what my mind was doing. But then I started having fights with God.
Yeah.
And Guruji knows the conversation. Like that's what's so shocking, right? When you finally meet the voice that was in your head and you're like, I'm sorry. Because I said some horrible things. Like I just went into a tailspin.
Yeah.
And I remember one night I was sitting in the rain crying, and the voice said, "Why don't you go to the Hanuman temple?" And I had started going there as part of my daily ritual, because I would get done in time to go down and listen to the priest do his chanting.
Yeah.
And it was a really old, I think it was 800-year-old, little temple around a Swayambhu Lingam, and it was Hanuman. And I didn't know Hanuman is an incarnation of Shiva who worships Vishnu. So he was like my bridge between Nityananda to Vishwananda. And I was just drawn there. Every day I'd go there, and I ended up being like a walking skeleton. My hair went gray, and I had to walk with a stick, and I just lost everything. All my muscles were metabolized, so I was just skin and bones. And the priest, if someone had come, it was a slum, and if someone had come and offered like bananas, he'd always hide one for me, and if I came, he'd give it to me. And there was another Swayambhu Lingam in the landfill nearby, and I said, "Well, what about that one? Why isn't there a temple?" And he said, "Oh, that's Devi. We do puja to her once a month." And I'm like, "Devi's like at the landfill?" And so I started, our property had beautiful roses and things. So every day I'd bring flowers for Hanuman, and then I'd go sit with Devi and cry and, and say, "I can't believe they're treating you like this," and I'd decorate. And it was a spectacular, remember the monolith in 2001, A Space Odyssey?
Yeah.
She looked like that. She's a black slab coming out of the earth.
Wow.
Self-manifested. And so I'd sit there with her, and I remember one day I was crying, and I put a rose on her, and in my inner space, I saw her garland made. She said, "We've been waiting for you for so long." And I just cried harder. I said, "No one's waiting for me. I'm dying." Right? And I thought, "You're just hallucinating now. Like, you're just gone." And so then one night, I was crying, and the voice said, "Go to the Hanuman temple." And so I went down there, and it was cloudy, so I didn't know it was Purnima. And they had put together a gift basket for me. So these poor, poor people with nothing were so upset that that white woman was dying, right, on the property. And so it was rice and coconuts and bananas and flowers. And as soon as I got close, the kids came running up and dragged me, and the priest went, "We thought you weren't going to come." And he waved me in, and the whole group were so excited that they could give me something, right? It was just, I've never seen that kind of kindness and generosity to a stranger, right? And they handed it to me, and I was just in tears. And then the kids were like, "Come, and they sat me down, and the big batch of sweet rice for Purnima was being served to the whole neighborhood, and they gave me one of those little leaf bowls, and they were instructed to give me as many refills as I wanted, because usually you just get one. And I couldn't even eat that. Like, my whole system was shutting down, and I couldn't swallow. And I was just like, this is hell, right? I'm looking at all this food, and I couldn't eat. But I took the bag, I thanked them, and I took the bag and put it in front of the mandir and said, "Thank you." And the voice goes, "I told you you'd feel better if you went to see Hanuman." And then I remember, I think it might have been the next day, instead of going into victim mode, I was exhausted, and I was just sitting there, and I said, "Have I done this to somebody?" Like, it finally hit me that this could be karmic. I was so busy with my wrong mindset. And I was yelled at. I was like, "Yes." And the movie that played in my head was that I had been a British Army officer during some campaign, and we marched through northern India like locusts, and we ate everything in every village we came to, and we left everyone to starve to death. And I Googled it afterwards, and there's photos of this Holocaust, this Indian Holocaust, and of course Britons tried to hide it, but millions died. So my karma was that everyone who died because of me now had the right to come back and kill me. So what, 10,000 lifetimes? Like, we don't understand the burden of our karma. And as soon as I saw that, I was sobbing and just begging for forgiveness. And I just said, "Whoever I've hurt, I am so sorry." And this weight lifted, and I realized I'd had it my whole life, right? Like, and I thought, how many lifetimes have I dragged this one? And I realized that he had to put me in a situation that was such a pressure cooker that it would pop out,
Yeah.
right? That, you know, just being in a lovely setting like this, being told to handle your karma, it wouldn't have come up.
Yeah, for
Right?
sure. Because you don't see it, you don't realize it.
Yeah, so it had to be life or death.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to get it or you're going to die. This
Yeah.
is your last chance. And so this weight lifted, and I felt fantastic. And then I heard a voice at the gate, and it was a woman from the ashram with money and food. And we were hours from the ashram.
Instantly.
So she manifested, right? And that's what I try and tell people, is the game changes the second you get the lesson.
Yeah.
Like, instantly. And so I staggered over, you know, got my walking stick and staggered over to the gate, and she's like, you know, looking at me. And she got on the phone and she goes, she's here. And I could hear them screaming, well, why didn't she answer her phone? And she's like, you don't understand what's going on here. You haven't sent her money for 3 months. She's dying. And there's like this silence. And I could just see the scene at the accounting office, everyone going, I thought you took care of it. I thought she took care of it. Right? And so that confusion was created by God to make the situation happen.
Yeah.
Right? None of those women meant me harm.
For sure.
Right? And I'm sure they felt horrible
For sure.
when they realized what was going on. But it had to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was amazing because the woman who brought everything, she was very high up in the organization. It was always being given gifts of saris and jewels. And she said to me, I was really mad that I was being asked to run this errand, like this, you know, take money to who?
Where?
Where? Yeah. And she said, you know what? I've completely lost sight of the path. I'm so involved in the politics and who's his favorite now and who got the latest presents, right? And she said, here you are. You're
Walking
a
the path.
seeker. Yeah. And so she said, get in the rickshaw. We're going shopping. And I felt like a little kid whose mom had come, right? Sitting there, and she's stopping at vendors and shoving, you know, food at me in juice boxes. And she turned the phone on. She turned the electricity on. Right? And I just, Mom came. And then we went to the little store across the street where I used to shop. And the owner looked so relieved that someone had come in, because you could tell. I went in there to see if I get something on credit when I didn't understand what was happening, and he's like, no. So he'd seen that happen before in there as a test, and he was so relieved when we came in with money. You know, he was just like, no, get to, you know, no, throw this in, and she wouldn't let me use the money she'd brought. She paid for it.
Oh, okay.
She said, just in case this happens again. And so I went back to the property, and the dogs came in. I went, we have food. And we're all like doing the victory dance. They served them milk. But one amazing thing that happened in the middle of all that, I was sitting in the middle of the property feeling guilty or feeling sorry for myself. And the black dog flew over the high wall, and she had a package in her mouth, and it was an unopened package of cookies. And she walked right past me and put it in front of the mundir the way she'd see me do groceries. And then she just crossed her legs and looked at me, and I said, did you bring me food? And she's like, yes, I did. And so I opened it up and I served her cookie, and I had a cookie. And so something I forgot to mention, when everyone left that first night, I could hear all the street dogs start barking and getting hysterical, and the sound moved up like a train next to the property, and then it circled the hut like a hurricane. And I couldn't tell what was going on. And the next morning when I went outside, there was 3 claw marks down the length of one of the big trees, so 6 feet, like 2 meters, claw marks. And I never knew what that was. And when I was in Elmira, I think it was in the spring, I was in front of Paramahamsa Narasimha, and that scene dropped in. And I looked at him, Narasimha, and I said, was that you? And the voice said, ask Tulsidas.
Yeah.
So I told him the story, and he just looked at me and he said, that's Narasimha's mark.
Yeah.
So he said, he was protecting you in India. So after those men had come and vandalized the place, Narasimha showed up, marked the territory.
Nobody touches.
Nobody ever came back. So, I went through my own test, but nothing from the outside came.
Wow.
And I'd never heard of Narasimha, right? But he was there. So I love telling people to journal.
Yeah.
Because so much of what happens to us might not make sense until down the road, right?
It's so important. It's so important to write everything down.
Yeah, because Guruji talks about first experience, then knowledge.
Yep.
So write those experiences down, and then the knowledge.
Especially write it down in detail, because you can have the flavor of it, but you forget details, and details are sometimes
Right, like those
really
claw
important.
marks, right? I could have just said they left me alone, and right.
Yeah, these are really important.
They are. And so after that whole starving thing, every time I went, I would leave every 6 months for Sri Lanka to get a new visa. And the last time I went, I had this inspiration that I was in the land where Babaji attained immortality. And it was Katargama is the little village where he was. And I realized I could go there. Like, and I'd never thought, a place I read about 30 years ago. I'm like, I'm actually here. I could go.
Yeah.
And this little town supports this massive Lord Murugan temple and a Buddhist shrine. And everybody mixes, goes back, and there's a beautiful palisade between the two, and everyone just mingles, right? The two cultures. But the only orange ones they see in the Lord Murugan temple are the Buddhist monks. So people were kind of looking at me when I showed up there in orange, because they'd never seen that. And so I came staggering in, all 80 pounds of me. And the first morning at 4:30 is the service, and you all ring the bells. There's hundreds of bells in the ceiling, and everyone starts ringing the brass bells, and the music starts, and everyone starts sending platters of food up to Lord Murugan, and it kept passed outside. And so we did that, and when I went past the priest to get, I put my hand out to get some prasad, and the guy looked at me and he went like this. So I put my hands together, and he put this massive sweet rice, because they could tell I had been starving. And then I staggered out to the courtyard, and I was trying to eat that, and people kept putting fruit on my lap, like, you're supposed to serve the sannyas first.
Yeah.
And they gave me so much food that I ended up having to bring bags every morning, because I would go back with like 3 grocery bags of mangoes and bananas and like everything you can imagine. So my whole body was rebuilt with prasad, right?
Wow.
2 weeks at that temple. And when I met Guruji here and I was being initiated, and we were just talking the last night, and he gave me his padakas. He energized them for like a half an hour while we talked, and then he handed them to me, and I said, finally something to replace the little wooden ones I got in Katargama. And he goes, Katargama? And I found out that you can't get there unless Babaji wants you to go there. And so he just got this look in his face, and he said, the Lord Murugan temple. And I said, yeah. And he goes, which deities did you get? And I said, I had a Ganesh and a Murugan and a Hanuman. And I said, when I saw your Hanuman here, I knew it was home, because Hanuman took care of me for a while. And he just jumped up and stormed out of the temple. But as he was getting up, I was looking at him because I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and he was crying. And I realized that memory of what happened to me, he knew it had to happen, but he wasn't happy about it, right? And so at first I was shocked. I thought, oh, what have I done wrong? Oh no, I've made him mad. But then when I came back for Arti at 8, he made a point of coming up to me and joking around. Like, I think he realized it was sort of an abrupt departure, but I was so touched that it upset him that I had gone through that. But it was like, all he can do is help us deal with our karma, but we still have to deal with it.
Yeah, we have to go through it. He cannot take that away from us, that experience.
And he says you have to be brave.
Yeah.
And for me, I had a visual once that it's like we've gone to the high diving platform, you know, the swimming pool. And I used to go up there as a kid, and all my friends would jump off, and I would go back down the ladder, right?
Yeah.
Because it was too high. It was terrifying. And I realized that the guru will go up there with you and push you off. It's like, enough. Like, stop farting around. You have to jump.
Yeah, don't stall, don't postpone.
Yeah.
Do it. Do
You
it.
got to do it.
I have a plan, you know, the script is
Right.
written.
Yeah.
You're delaying.
Yeah, and I think most of us are so terrified of facing that karma. And all you can do is just, and as Guruji says, if you pray for people, pray that they have the strength to go through what they have to go through.
Yeah.
And, you know, so when all that had kind of wrapped up, I, you know, got my new visa, flew back to Bangalore, and they wouldn't let me in. And so the guard was, and I had, you can only show up with a return trip ticket showing in 6 months you're going to leave again. And so they said, you have to use that ticket now. And so they walked me back to Sri Lankan Airlines. And I asked the security guard, I said, what did I do wrong? And he said, nothing. He said, maybe he's just having a bad day. Try to fly into another airport tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I flew back to Sri Lanka. They went, oh, you were just here. And I said, yeah, they kicked me out. And they went, well, we want you. And so I went back to the hotel hadn't even changed my bedding. Like, welcome back, yay, you know, gave me an ice cream cone, and we watched the soccer match. And they drove me to the airport the next morning, and I flew to Mumbai. And they put me in this room and interrogated me for like 5 hours. They're fascinated that a Westerner was a sannyas, right? So they served me tea, and we chatted, and I thought, this is going great. And they said, okay, well, now it's time for you to go back to Canada. And I went, when was that in the conversation? And they said, yep, nope, you can't come. And so they wouldn't let me near my luggage. So I was in an raggedy orange sari, because I hadn't been given a new one. And in that tradition, you can only wear what the guru has handed you. And I'd been in, you know, these huts for years by then. So everything was just raggedy and faded. And I was in my patakas. And so I got on the plane to Canada, and I had a stern conversation with the voice, because by then I'd flown back and forth to Sri Lanka 4 times, and now I was flying last minute to Canada. So it was the top price, right?
Yeah.
No discounts. And I was like, you better have a way to pay off this, because I was using my emergency credit card. And got back to Canada. No one from Nityananda's organization would talk to me. He read my messages, everyone read my messages, and no one responded. And so I thought, I've worked so hard to get these vows, I'm not going to drop them. And so I stayed in Orange, and I ended up moving in with my mom, who was in her 90s, and her short-term memory was gone. So she thought I'd been gone a week. Right? So she's like, oh, come stay, we'll have tea. And so it was perfect. I had a place to stay while I tried to figure out what was going on. And she had company, right? She was just, it was like her brain was on snooze mode because she was alone. And my brother would drop by with groceries, but he's a father and a teacher. And so we just hung out, and I thought, okay, this is your Dharma. You know, take care of her, make her laugh every day, right?
So
And then my brother came over, and he said, you know, I've been hanging on to mail that's shown up for you. And like, he was one of the ones who thought I was in a cult.
Oh, yeah.
And so me just being around and looking after Mom completely relaxed him, right? He realized I'm still me, right? I'm not some nut. But he brought this mail that had been sitting for years, and one of them was from the Teamsters, and it was like, where do you want your pension money sent? And you know, when you're working for a union, there's so many deductions off your paycheck that I couldn't even follow what all they were taking off. I was still making a fortune, so I didn't care. And it turns out there was a pension fund. And so if I hadn't come back to Canada, the money would have just gone somewhere. And so they sent me this check, and it paid for all the flights and left money in my savings. And so then that was January, June. One of Guruji's devotees in California, who'd met me in India, said, I heard your guru doesn't want you anymore, but mine's coming to Vancouver, you should come. And he says Vishwananda, and I remembered him
Came to the camp.
walking in like, a ray of sunshine. And so I thought, well, nobody else seems to want me. And this guy goes, it's so weird. He's flying to Vancouver, but he's only invited Americans. And I thought, well, I'll come. So it was an unexpected trip. It was right after the temple was opened. And he just grabbed Rishi Shambhava and they jumped on a plane and flew to Vancouver. And so some Americans shot across the border from Bellingham, and I arranged so I would land at the same time as everybody else. And so Gurji walked into the airport and same thing. I'm like, oh my God, there he is. And so he said hello to everybody, and I was introduced, and he goes, how is Swamiji? Because that's his nickname. Yeah. And I said, I don't know. I said, he kicked me out. I haven't seen him for years. And it's like, check. You can see him going, all right. And then, he sort of looked at the group and he said, our country coordinator was there. And he garlanded him and he said, isn't anyone else here from Canada? And I said, I am. And he goes, where? I said, Calgary. And Rishi Shambhava kind of jolted. And afterwards he said, he's been looking for you for a year.
Wow.
And so when we got out a calendar and went backwards and realized when all the chaos started happening, he had been here in Germany, and he looked up and he went, there's someone in Calgary we have to go find.
Wow.
And everyone's like, where the hell's Calgary? Like, what? And so he put the wheels in motion for me to get kicked out of India. Yeah. And I met him. And so the whole weekend my mind was exploding. And he just was so gentle and just talked, we talked about anything I wanted. And we thought that at one point we were touring some temples and we went into a Buddhist shrine and he said, let's sit and meditate. And as soon as we sat down, it's like he landed and I just left my body. Like it was just this massive energy. It was like Babaji, right? Yeah. Just boom. And I sort of tried to hang on and then I just thought, and I was out. And so then I heard this little Asian man going, it's very nice you're having good meditation, but you have to move. No, you have to. And so I heard everyone jumping up, and I couldn't get back in. Right? Like I was really, it's like, oh wow, just leave me. Like I'm in
Close
heaven.
the temple. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I finally got my act together, and I was sort of tailing way behind the group as they finished their tour, and we all went downstairs, and I was just hanging on because I felt like I was going to fall down the stairs. I couldn't get back in my body. And Gurji started to leave, and then he obviously saw I was like way at the back in distress, and so he walked through the crowd, and he came up to me, and he goes, I'll see you later, okay? And I kind of went, and boom, I landed, right? He just got me back.
Brought you back, grounded you.
Yep. And I was like, what did he say? And I'm like, I don't know. But I thought, this is the one. Like, he's one of these guys, right? And when we thought everything was done and the weekend was over, all of a sudden everyone's phones lit up. On Telegram, I'd never heard of Telegram, but everyone else's phone went. And they said, he wants us to go to the movies. And I'd had to renounce that, right? As a sannyas.
Of all the things.
And I was like, no. And so we zoomed to this IMAX theater, and he was standing in the lobby, and he looked at me and he said, how many gurus have taken you to the movies? And I said, none, but I know how to do this. Let's make movies. And he kind of, okay. And people who were sitting close to him, it was Jurassic Park 3D. And I was sort of down the row. But they said that he wasn't watching the movie, he was watching the people. Because every time everyone jumped and screamed, he just burst out laughing.
Yeah, he enjoys that a lot.
He just wanted to see that. And so over time, he's said things that have pointed specifically to a situation. And that he knows what happened. He knows what I went through. And it's just comforting, right? So I haven't lost the honeymoon phase with him, even though it's been 6 years, because the hammering I got in India that just about killed me, that was that phase, right? He didn't have to do it to me here because his partner in crime was doing it. Yeah. And as soon as, that was the other thing, is as soon as we sat down for the first breakfast, I was sitting across from Tim, who's now Swami Sridhar, and Guruji said, why don't you tell everyone about your experience with Babaji? And I thought, oh, cool. And so Tim started talking, and then the voice said, and then you tell yours. And I looked down the table, and he was looking at me, and I'm like, you're the voice in my head. Like my whole life, you're the voice. And I just thought, complete, like the whole circle's complete now. And so I still hear him, and I think that's why he's just left me sort of hands off. And his only instruction to me was follow the inspiration wherever it takes you, because the inspiration is him.
Yep.
Right? And so for the first little while, some swamis were questioning why I was doing things that hadn't been done before. And I couldn't explain it. It's like he said, follow the inspiration, and he's the inspiration. So who are we to question? And so then he made it really clear that it was hands off. Like, just let's see what she does. Right? And so I rarely speak to him in person, even when I'm here, because I don't think he wants to wreck the telepathic connection. It's like, if you're already hearing me there, then I don't have to talk to you.
You just go, do what you have to do.
Yeah. And it's so sweet, because like the chaos of Navaratri, I remember one night, all these women are pushing through into the Swamini area, and you try and find your seat, and and they're all glaring at you and yelling at you, and I just I don't need this, right? And at the end of the one night, he came out with the Amrit, and he went straight to the Swaminis, and there was this wall of women in front of me, and I said, excuse me, can I get, and they just glared at me and wouldn't let me through. And so he, did the Amrit and then took off across the tent. And I thought, you know what, I'm too old for this. Like, fighting with women who have no respect for swamis. And so I just sat on one of those little kid chairs near the exit. And next thing I knew, Guruji was running back across the tent.
Yeah, he just deflected the group, and then
came back, gave me Amrit, and then took off again. And I was like, you're still my guy.
Always,
he's still here. Yeah, still hears. He knows what's happening. He knows who's disrespecting you, right? And I'm so grateful for every adventure he's given me, right? Because, I go back to Canada, and miracles happen all the time, and I know it's him, right? Somebody will give me, I'll think about, I should think about getting this to survive. And then someone gifts it to me. And I'm just like, thanks, Guruji. Right? He gives someone the inspiration to get me the thing that I needed to get to.
And that's the beauty of, I think that's the beauty of also being always traveling and not owning anything, because you can actually feel his grace.
Right.
If you would be in one place, settled, everything provided, like that woman that you were talking about, she lost in the sight that, I've been losing the path. But if you're walking the path with no attachment, then you have no other option but to surrender and to accept whatever's been given. And you see how he provides everything.
You have no idea how something's going to get resolved, and it gets resolved. Like, obviously it's him. And it's sweet, because sometimes to find places to live, I house sit for people. And just before I came here, I was asked to house sit this one place just for a week. And it was in an unusual part of Calgary where there's nothing around it, no temples and no shopping areas. Like there was. And so I got there, and it was a beautiful, beautiful home, espresso machine and 2 gorgeous cats and streaming movies. But I was like, Guruji, why did you want me here? And for a week, that seems weird. And then I noticed that the only thing close by was a Turkish bakery. And so I thought, well, I'll go there for breakfast. So I walked into this bakery as soon as it opened, and the owner was a man from Turkey and Muslim. And as soon as I walked in, he gave me the biggest smile. He was so excited, because I always walk around like this. And so I walked up and, what do you recommend? I haven't been here before. And he was telling me what his specialties were. And so when I was ordering, he was holding his arm to punch in on the computer. And so I went, what's wrong with your arm? Right? And he started to tell me the physical problems he's got, and they're massive. And he said, every 2 weeks I go to the hospital and they give me shots, but nothing is fixing it. And I said, well, in my tradition, I said, I'm Hindu, you're Muslim, right? And he goes, yeah. And I said, okay, well, in my tradition, we talk about samskaras and how emotional trauma stays in you and it will make you sick. And he started to tear up and he said, can we talk when I bring your order? And I said, yeah. So he brought over this fantastic Turkish coffee and some bakery stuff. And
Triggering your samskaras.
yeah. I don't have any desires. I'm unattached.
Turkish coffee and bakery.
And he was literally crying and telling me what was going on. And I said, emotional traumas that happen to us when we're younger will do this. And I said, did something happen to you? He said, yes, that's why I had to flee Turkey. And I just looked at him and I thought, wow, what has happened to him, right? And we just started talking, and immediately the name of a chiropractor I know dropped into my head. And he was trained by some of Yogananda's followers in Encinitas to do this NET work, neuro-emotional technique.
Okay.
And you do muscle testing, so your body will give yes, no responses. And so, say your neck's out, they can touch the part of your neck and say, does this have an emotional trigger? And your body will do a yes, no. Does this have to do with a man or a woman between the age of 0 to 5 to, like, they can narrow it down. And the more I had that work done, the faster the image would pop up. Yep. And so I removed a lot of samskaras before I knew Kriya Yoga, just by doing this treatment. And so his name immediately popped into my head. And then this gentleman said, you wouldn't know anyone who could help me, do you? And I said, because I wouldn't have just offered it, right? Like, I was trying to be really careful about this relationship. And I said, well, yeah, actually a name has popped into my head. And so I wrote it out for him, and we talked a bit longer. And I said, well, you pray, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, I pray. So I said, it all starts with prayer, right? So pray and ask if this is the one you should go to. And if you get a yes, then this is your guy. And he just, the smile on his face, right? And when I was walking back to the house, I felt so amazing. I said, thanks, Guruji, that's why you put me here, right? Because 2 days later I was gone, and I'll never see him again.
That's it.
And I'm so happy when I find out who my seva is, right? Because he always puts me somewhere where something has to be done. And 2 women that I ended up house sitting for, like in this last year, are both Christian ministers. And the lack of knowledge is shocking, right? So one of them, she was going on a sabbatical for a couple of weeks, then back for 2 days, then gone again. So she said, oh, just stay while I'm here, we can visit. And so we watched this one movie where the little guy won against the corporation. And it was because he got a really good lawyer, but he also got the heart of the jury behind him. And after the movie ended, this tough Christian minister goes, well, it's good that it was a happy ending, but he didn't deserve to win. I said, what do you mean? She said, legally, he should not have won that case. And I said, well, there's man's law and there's God's law. And it was a true story. And I said, this little guy had to bring down this corrupt corporation, and he did it. And she glared at me and just dropped it and left the room.
Yeah.
I thought, what are you teaching people? Like, you have a congregation.
You're responsible for people.
Yeah, what are you teaching them? And she showed me this book she's reading, and it's by some guy, right? It's like, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. It's like this, a guy has come up with something, and he's a PhD. And it's like, So he's thinks
You're
he knows.
making things up while you're on the go, It's like, I read this book, I'm going to present this to my
Yes,
congregation.
I know.
This is the new revolutionary idea, bestseller, New York bestseller.
And I looked at her and I said, "Is he a God-realized master?" Well, no. And I said, "Well, then he knows nothing." Like, how can he talk about reality?
At least go to the scripture,
Right. Right.
At least go to the scriptures.
Yeah. And I just thought, wow, Guruji has given us, because originally, at first when you're initiated as Swamini, you're like, oh man, am I going to be worthy? Like,
Yeah.
what do I know?
Yeah.
And then you start coming up against people who are supposed to be your peers, and you realize Guruji has given us so much.
Even if you only listen to his satsangs
Yeah.
and you don't read any scripture, just by listening to his satsangs, by default you are you're flooded with
Unbelievable.
your knowledge.
Yeah. Even in the airport coming here, our plane was delayed, and I'm sitting there all orange, and this Hindu came running up to me and didn't even ask if he could sit down, just sat down and started lecturing me and questioning me to see if I knew anything. And I was just like, I'm a Swamini, right? Yes, I've gone through all of.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but have you done? Yeah, have you done? And then he whips out his Bhagavad Gita by Prabhupada.
Yeah.
Well, have you read this? And I whipped out my Bhagavad Gita Essentials, and I said, no, I read this because he's alive. My guru is a God-realized master. And he was just like, and I said, your guy's gone. I said, this is for today. And he got up and he ran away.
What
Don't
a
mess
scene.
with me.
You don't know where I've been, buddy.
Well, and it is funny because of what Guruji's put me through my whole life. Some guys come up and try and do mansplain things to me, and I just like saying, people have tried to kill me. You got nothing, right?
I survived accidents.
Homeless, starving
yes,
in India.
starving. You
You're
tried to lecture
threatening
me,
me?
bro.
This is not going to work.
Walk away.
That's right. You child, you.
I've been through 2 gurus, man.
Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful.
Well, and it gets funnier and funnier, right? That's the thing that I'm loving is the more your karma's pulled off, the funnier it gets. And so
This
I've
is the
gone from being
beauty
in
of
a
it,
horror picture to a drama to a comedy.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think that at the end of the day, and this is what I love a lot about Guruji, he has this crazy humor.
yeah,
And this is for me, this was from the beginning a sign of a comfort zone for me, because I was coming from the background that I had. I was also enjoying the drama myself. And when I started to walk the path and detach a little bit, I could see the humor in all that drama. And having Guruji's input with humor on that drama, I said, okay, he's the guy. Because if he has the humor, that's the guy. If it's too serious, then I'm like a little bit reserved. If you don't have the humor to make fun of it, because for me, humor is crucial in breaking the ego.
yeah,
Because nothing compares to being ridiculed.
right.
And if you can make fun of yourself, then you're on the right path. If you take yourself too serious and do not allow yourself to be ridiculous, and to destroy your reputation in whatsoever aspect, then you're into suffering. Then the drama kicks in and you have to go through all the blah, 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 blah. But if you have the humor, that means you are detached already on one. Or you've passed the test and you can watch in hindsight and say, that was stupid. Let's move on.
That's right. What were you thinking?
Yeah.
Well, and Guruji, I could tell he did a spot quiz for me at the end of the Radharani temple inauguration in Toronto, and we were all smushed into this tiny temple, and so I ended up right at his feet, and he started going through the Gopi Gita, and I just burst into tears, and I couldn't stop, and I was trying to like hide, I was pulling my sari sort of over my head, and it was ugly crying, right? It's snot, and I had nothing, and we were so packed I couldn't leave. And then I think somebody over there spotted what was going on, and all of a sudden this old crumpled up paper towel got pushed to me, slid over to me, and I, oh, okay, and I'm trying not to take the attention from him, who's right here, right? I'm just like kind of, and then I finally got myself under control, and I was like, okay, just be present, be. And I looked up at him, and he turned on me, and he immediately started ridiculing me, right? And it just came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I was so delighted that he was talking to me that I just burst out laughing. And some people thought I should have been insulted, right? Like, because the way he all of a sudden went after me. And I just couldn't stop laughing. And then he gave up, right? He was like, okay, she's okay. And I realized it was a test, right? Is her ego.
Because you're on the spot, you're the Swami,
Yeah.
you're visible, it's tight space, you should be like presentable.
Yeah, and
puts you on the spot.
And if he's going to insult me, like I should be, you know.
Oh my God.
But I was just like, he's talking to me.
You're the gopi. You're the gopi.
Yeah. Oh.
He's giving me attention.
Insult me more. Insult me more. And then he just laughed and stopped, right? And I thought, it's just a game. Yeah. It's just And every time and I loved it because Swami Revati gave that great talk a year or two ago where he just explained the state of the Paramahamsa. Mm-hmm. And remember, it was in the temple, and he goes through, behaves like a child. Yeah. Remember, he goes through all those things, and he talked at one point about how he used to insult him and Swami Aniruddha. Mm-hmm. And one time he said, "You're like the dried up piece of poop on my ass." And they looked at each other, and it was so outlandish, they burst out laughing. Because I guess normally if he insulted them, they'd be hurt. But this time it was so gone that they laughed. And I thought, oh, good, it's happening to everybody, right? You have to just
go through it.
Yeah,
don't take it personal, man.
And if it set off something, then look at that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, why would I be upset?
Yeah.
Like, what is?
That means you're still holding on to some reputation. For me, this is always coming up into my mind, reputation, because I think this is something we are so trained by society to look at. You have this image of yourself. You need to be presentable in one way. You build your whole life on that, your career, your everything, your job.
Well, and the expectations.
Yeah.
You know, by this age, you should be doing this.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's one amazing thing about age. Like New Year's Day, I turned 70. So it's a big milestone. And I get it. I get old people now. I wrote a lot of biographies for older people when I was writing. And I was usually just hired by the family. And they just had this, I don't give a rat's ass attitude, right? Because they've survived so much. Yeah. And they've also realized, you know, don't sweat the small stuff. Like, all of it comes and goes. Yeah. None of it is worth. This too shall pass. Yeah.
One of my favorite sayings.
Exactly.
This too shall pass.
And as you get older, there's no anxiety anymore. Stuff comes up and you're like,
what to do?
What to do?
What to do? We move on.
How about some tea?
Exactly.
Yeah. And, you know, so I feel for you at your age because I remember there's still those buttons that where the anxiety hits or what am I going to do about this? And, you know, part of your mind goes, it's all going to be great, you know. And then another part is going, but what if?
It's interesting because one of the things that was somehow removed once I met him was exactly this, the reputation. I think that was when we also decided to quit acting because it made no sense, the reputation game, fame game, everything that made absolutely no sense because it was just a play of the ego. And when you come to Bhakti Marga and you start doing the performances we do here, it has nothing to do with your reputation. It has only to do with surrendering and serving.
To serve the character, to serve the story.
To serve the play, serve the story, serve your fellow bhaktas on stage, serving. That's the only thing that has to do with it. And Guruji is the master director, and he cuts your ego instantly. Whenever you have a slightest either he lets it build up and then he pops the balloon and then you drop from height, either he cuts it from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I love this. I love this because I started doing it somehow before meeting him. I was always fascinated by Fools for Christ and all that movement of clowns, sacred clowns, heyokas from the Native Americans. I was fascinated with them because they always put the mirror and they didn't care about what was happening to them.
Right.
And by not caring what was happening to them, they were putting themselves through so much unimaginable social craziness, you might say, that people started looking at themselves and they were exposing the hypocrisy. That's what they were always doing. And I always played that wild card, and I always had that in me, and that's why I even at parties, whatever, I used to do like crazy stuff that people would not normally do, and people, are you not ashamed? I'm like, for what? I didn't do something to offend people, and if people get offended, it's their problem. Speak loud, whatever, you know. But it helped me now with Guruji a lot that now when I see him doing to other people, I know that he's just trying to expose the ego.
Right.
He's just exposing
And sometimes you just need to shock somebody
the ego. Yep.
to get it to come out. And like in ancient India, that was one amazing thing about working in publications was I got to read books, and I realized I'd wasted so much time reading Western books. But it turned out that before lawsuits and lawyers and everything, if you were under the care of a guru, if you were just stuck and you were not transforming, no matter how much he said to you, you know, treated you, if you were just stuck, they would smash a clay pot on your head. And that jolt, would often, oh, now I know. So we used to run around joking, I think it's a 2 clay pot day, like if we were really not understanding what we were being taught. And I loved that. I loved that. And another one, I guess there was an ashram that was in a square around a courtyard, and the guru was walking along the second level with a student, and then all of a sudden just went boop and pushed him off the rail, and he fell the 1 story down to the courtyard. I get it.
Exactly.
And I've almost felt Guruji's influence if I'm not getting something and I'll run into a cupboard that's open.
Yep.
Or take a corner wrong and hit the door frame. And I feel like he's going, stop it, like shift.
That's the beauty of having a guru. I mean, I cannot, do you imagine, like, I cannot imagine myself now without him. It's like it would be meaningless.
And the confusion of life.
Not having him
like,
in my life, like guiding.
Why did this happen? Why did that happen? Right? Whereas it might take a jolt before we go, I was doing this.
And we, like you said, that voice was always with you since the beginning. I think everybody has that guidance. I don't think only the chosen one can have a guru. I think everybody has that guidance. Everybody has that voice that's inside that could be even the voice of your own soul.
Right.
That is guiding you towards, on your path, towards the goal, is to connect to God. But it's so clouded by the illusion of life.
And I think children have that access, and I think handing kids these devices at such a young age, that voice is being drowned out like by the time they're 3 years old. And kids need to be like still and silent and in a room playing with rocks or making up fantasy stories, because that's when that voice comes through.
This is a discussion in itself, because now there's no way around it. I think kids wake up in this society that's going to be run by screens.
Right.
It's going to be run by AI in the future. They're going to have like Tesla robots being their nannies.
Right.
So I think it's like just another evolutionary step. But Guruji always told, like when talking about kids, he said, your kids will learn in the first 3 years from you. So whatever you do, that's going to be embedded in them.
Yeah.
And I saw with our daughter now, with Radha, we've been doing puja every day, kriya every day. We've been doing om chanting. Now that we have the opportunity to be in the ashram, she's coming every day to prayers. So her whole universe is this.
Wow. What a gift.
Guruji is her friend. I mean, Guruji, he's my friend, So she has this grace, to be immersed in this. And for devotees who are not living here, still at home, they still can offer this to their kids. Even though they're going to be exposed, like great parents, parents of the year award goes to us also. She has access to cartoons, but she's watching Little Krishna.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So for her, when we first showed her a cartoon, we showed her Little Krishna, and now for her, when she comes to the temple, she knows the stories of all the images in the temple because she saw the cartoon and she's like, oh, there's the demon that fell from the sky. Oh, Krishna stealing the butter,
Yeah.
So now it makes sense for her, the images.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you choose. I mean, technology can be a really good support, but what do you feed the mind with?
What I found with my son, like I knew he was good on computers, and he ended up being good with graphics on computers, but I always watched what he played. He knew I would walk into the room at any time.
Yeah.
But also, I remember when he was a teenager, one winter day, I think he'd been in his room almost all day playing. And then I asked him to come out and help me with something, and he just snapped at me. And I went, do you see that? He's like, what? And I said, you were nice for 2 hours, and now you're not. I said, I think that's your limit. What do you mean? I said, I think after 2 hours,
your brain,
you become this horrible person. And it just kind of stopped him. And then he started monitoring himself. And he saw it. He could see how he became short-tempered and angry at a certain, because I think at a certain spot you can't take it anymore.
Yep.
And
because it's a dopamine hit after dopamine hit when you play games and stuff like that. And at one point you go into the addictive.
Yeah. And so
behavior.
he just started turning it off himself. Like I just told him to watch how his mood shifted, and he did.
Knowledge.
Right? Yeah, you just have to tell him, because I didn't want him to be some weirdo kid who didn't have a computer.
Yeah, of course.
Because I've seen those.
Yep.
They're so ostracized. And in the public school where we were, all the assignments had to be submitted online. Because teachers were tired of trying to read handwriting, so every kid had to be able to type out their assignment and send it. So you're going to cripple your kid.
Yeah, and it's just the age we're going towards what to do.
Yep.
I'm still going to encourage her to write by hand, but at the end of the day, she's probably going to talk, and it's going to be written by ChatGPT.
My son writes like a 4-year-old, because he can type, but his handwriting is like...
New skills.
They don't have to do it, so...
Amazing. It was a great conversation.
Oh, well,
I'm so happy we had this in person. But I'm also super excited because I heard now the stories like up close. And I remember some of them from the book, some from the satsangs, but now the whole experience of having the conversation was like so rich, and I'm having a blast whenever I meet you. It's so nice.
I'm always afraid I'm boring people.
I'm like,
that story?
No.
Because it is like it happened to somebody else. It's interesting when I was initiated as a Swamini, it's like that old person's gone. Yeah. And I wrote the follow-up book, and then I had a dream where Guruji was giving darshan outside, and he was up on this hill, and there was thousands of people, and I was going to go, and then I noticed I was wearing sweatpants, and I thought, I can't go up like this, and then all of a sudden he just shot out of a door next to me, and he went, the second book, hold off on that one. And then he disappeared, and boom, he was back up giving darshan. So I was like, okay, it's not done.
Yeah, you
Right, that second
probably
one,
need to add the
There's,
chapters to the
there's
book.
some chapters that haven't happened yet. So,
Oh, nice.
but yeah, I wanted to write it down while I remembered it.
Perfect. Because it can be written
Yeah.
while it goes.
Yeah. So during lockdown for COVID, right?
Perfect timing.
I just made myself sit down and remember all of these events, right?
Amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
It's such an honor to have
Oh.
had you here.
Well, I love watching your show, like the walk the talk. It's always fascinating to see where everyone's
Yeah.
come from.
Yeah, people's journey
Yeah.
is an inspiration. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
I'm drawing so much and it's enriching me, and I hope everybody feels the same. From the feedback, seems like it's a format that works for people. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep on doing it as long as Guruji wants it. So
Nice.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
I feel like we're gonna have like a second round. Who knows?
We'll see what happens. Yeah.
I would love to come to Canada maybe, and maybe we do a walk the talk there.
Well, this
who knows?
valley that Guruji has blessed me to set up a retreat in.
I was thinking about that.
Well, I think it has huge possibilities.
So thank you once
Thank
again.
you for inviting
For the people who stayed with us so far, see you next time. Stay grounded and walk straight towards God. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev.